Chapter 56. Outside Gufang's star, a majestic figure stood quietly in the endless starry sky. Beside him, there was nothing but a blurry image. I originally thought that although there were only 5 emperors in our era, it would be enough to become the most powerful golden generation in the past few thousand years. But now it seems that I was wrong. As one of the strongest bloodlines in the past, as one of the most powerful young emperors among the billions of races in the endless galaxy, you should be very gratified to be surpassed. Gratified, that's right, gratified. Because the person who surpassed him was his child, Gulen. Actually, I didn't expect him to reach this step. Back then, we did everything we could but failed to awaken his bloodline. In the end, I took him away from the family. At that time, all I wanted was for him to live a carefree life. But who would have thought that the things that we, the royal god's descendant, couldn't accomplish, would now be accomplished by himself? I don't know if this is a good or bad thing for him. Hearing the words of the figure, the Gulen god sighed. He looked at the incomparably huge Gufang star beneath his feet. In the end, he shook his head gently. This is his fate, a fate that nothing can take away or change. His awakening in this era has already determined everything. 500 years, it's already been 500 years. Our human race no longer has any divine king. For the human race that dominates countless galaxies and is one of the most powerful races in the entire universe, this is definitely a dangerous signal. We once thought, and even those hidden peak existences of the ancient families thought so too, that you were the one with the greatest hope of reaching that step. But now it seems that this honor is about to change. Turning around and looking at the figure, the Gulen god revealed a trace of helplessness. Now it seems that the one with the greatest hope of reaching that final step isn't you, but your child. Hearing this, the hazy figure finally showed a trace of fluctuation. Although the Gulen god was still somewhat worried, if it were him, he couldn't help but feel proud. You don't have to trouble yourself with this matter. Just now, you shattered the consciousness of those old farts. They definitely won't find out about your child's existence. I think you don't have to worry about the 2 people down there. He's a member of the Lu family, and from the looks of it, they seem to know Lu Feng's identity. The one called Lu Luo was also a good seedling. If he can improve further in the future, then it is very likely that he will be another Yu. The Lu family is indeed his bloodline. Even in this era where human geniuses are scarce, you still make the billions of races in the universe look askance. This time, the shadow didn't say anything, because at this moment, his body was already transparent, almost disappearing. Gulan, seal off all information. You don't have to worry about the 2 members of the Lu family. This time I, Lu Tao, owe you. In the future, I will repay you. Finally, his body disappeared completely. Looking at the empty starry sky, Gulen god's expression was no longer as relaxed as before. At this moment, he seemed to be shrouded in a layer of majesty. Looking at the huge Gulen star, he finally sighed softly, his expression extremely solemn. Lu Tao, when you first became a godslayer, although we were opponents, we also placed our hopes on you. However, in the end, you still fell before that step because of those bastards. Now your child has appeared. This time, I definitely won't let such a thing happen again. The entire sacrificial ground, which used to be the last forbidden ground of the ancient Fang civilization, was now completely enveloped by a boundless, resplendent brilliance. This dazzling brilliance could illuminate the entire world. This unparalleled phenomenon naturally caused a commotion in the entire ancient Fang city. Countless existences rushed toward the sacrificial ground, fearing to be the first to arrive. However, what they faced was a boundless army. The armies belonging to the dozens of cities around ancient Fang City were actually all gathered here, preventing anyone from entering. Just like that, countless people gathered to watch, but they were unable to see the real situation. At this moment, Lu Feng's body, which existed in the outside world, was undergoing an endless, mysterious transformation. This was a kind of blood-soaked rebirth, a brand new life blossoming from the endless blood. Countless runes had already reached an extreme level of density. It was also at this moment that faint cracks appeared on Lu Feng's body. In the blink of an eye, countless cracks appeared. His entire body was like glass as the cracks spread all over his body. A dense, bronze radiance gradually appeared from his body and soon dyed his entire body. This body, which was wrapped in endless golden light, revealed a strange, dazzling brilliance. The terrifying, huge yellow spring steel's phantom swayed in the outside world, but it didn't descend, as if it was afraid of something. However, just as Lu Feng was about to complete his shocking transformation, it finally couldn't hold back any longer. It suddenly descended toward the bronze body that was tinged with golden light. This was an unfathomable power. Any existence below a god couldn't resist such power. If this had happened in the past, this body would have been completely shattered and turned into endless dust. However, at this moment, everything changed. An ancient phenomenon vaguely appeared behind Lu Feng's body. It was a terrifying existence without a face. It was boundlessly blurry. From top to bottom, there was an ancient desolation. It was a kind of endless desolation. Endless aura rose. It was the aura that belonged to a demon. It was the aura of a great demon that surpassed all true demons and heavenly demons. The first level of the great demon true body, bronze body great demon, large success. Demonic flames filled the sky, burning everything in the world. Everything was being destroyed. Billions of living beings were frightened and trembling. This was a kind of trembling that came from the depths of their souls. It was a kind of dominion that couldn't be resisted. This kind of power had already surpassed any kind of reverence. Gulen God looked at the region where the light soared into the sky. An unprecedented look of shock finally appeared on his face. He couldn't believe that such a terrifying amount of power was being emitted from such a weak body. Such power was enough to kill even a god at this moment. I hate the heavens for allowing me to live in the same world as the king. Is this the power of the bloodline of the strongest king since ancient times? Madness, endless madness. At this moment, Lu Feng's physical body had already reached an endless state of madness. Countless bloodline powers were being drawn out by him, madly strengthening the invincible great demon. It gradually began to expand, as if there was no end to it. Finally, at this final moment, the most powerful collision occurred. It was a punch, an unparalleled and indescribable punch. The ancient great devil became the boiling blood, the eternal source of slaughter. His fist struck out with boundless brilliance, destroying all obstacles and shackles. Finally, the heavens broke. King! That is the power of a king. After shattering the bloodline's unlock, he can actually release the power of a king. Lulua went crazy. At this moment, his eyes were incomparably red. Although he didn't recognize the existence of the demonic flames, that incomparably eye-catching golden light couldn't be concealed. From it, he could feel the throbbing of his bloodline. It was an ancient summon. That was the majesty of a king, that was the aura of their ancestor, the bloodline of the first king since ancient times. He had finally awakened, completely awakened the most powerful bloodline. The future belonged to mankind, to the Lu family. Shattering the heavens, shattering time and space, shattering everything. Finally, that punch completely shattered everything. In the empty sky, one could vaguely see the countless outer starry skies. This was an incomprehensible power. Facing such a blow, even God Gulan trembled slightly, having the urge to fight. However, he knew that this wasn't Lu Feng's true strength. It was just an extreme power that was instantly produced after the king's bloodline was unlocked. Perhaps after he became a god, he could once again erupt with such a peerless attack. But now it was absolutely impossible. However, he could wait. He could really wait. Your father is overflowing with talent and can be said to be the pinnacle of the universe's myriad races. But you are even stronger than your father. Perhaps after you become a true god, I won't be your opponent. But the moment you step into the god realm, I can still suppress you with my strength that is one level higher than yours. After all, your bloodline is really too terrifying. In the dark space, Lu Feng felt the completion of his transformation and his breakthrough, but he didn't feel much joy. Because at this moment, his eyes were replaced by shock. Everything in front of him was so shocking that he found it hard to believe. Because at this moment, in this dark space, in front of the blood-red giant, a figure actually appeared. It was an invincible figure that spanned across the ages and suppressed all generations. His strongest attack was shattered by this invincible golden giant, without any suspense or the slightest fluctuation. Lu Feng knew that the blood-red giant was the supreme being of the universe, the divine king of the underworld, who had once plunged the entire universe into endless fear. He was the pinnacle existence among the divine kings. He was a peerless overlord that even other existences at the divine king realm had to avoid. However, at this moment, in front of the illusory golden giant, he was completely no match for it. Everything was directly shattered by it. At this moment, Lu Feng had an indescribable feeling. This golden giant seemed to be him, or perhaps it was his bloodline. This seemed to be the golden bloodline that was moving within the endless seals and shackles. Chapter 57. Could it be that my bloodline is also? Lu Feng was silent. He had already vaguely guessed it. To be able to suppress the remnant consciousness of the divine king and completely shatter it, perhaps some gods could do it. But to be able to do it at the same level, only an existence of the same level could do it. It could only be the peerless divine king, who was also known as the supreme of the universe. He, Lu Feng, actually had the bloodline of the divine king. The two invincible giants looked at each other, but they did not do anything. They no longer had any will, they were just the projection of a remnant power. After a long time, the two invincible existences made their move again. But this time, it was as if they were plucking the stars and setting the moon. They were completely destroying everything. Lu Feng could clearly feel it. In such a terrifying confrontation, any bit of power that leaked out was enough to shatter the land within a radius of 1,000,000 miles. In their hands, even the simplest wave of their arms contained unimaginable profoundness and profundities. Lu Feng did not understand. He knew that his level was really too low. Even if he had opened up the god's domain and had the ability to comprehend things that no one else could reach, he still could not see through the peerless mysteries that only appeared at the level of gods or even supreme of the universe. But even so, Lu Feng was still frantically trying to memorize. He knew that in the future, all of these would be invaluable treasures to him. One day, he would be able to comprehend all of these and be able to integrate them. In the pervasive darkness, the two invincible giants had already fought to the extreme. Finally, the blood-red giant could no longer hold on. His body began to slowly collapse, everything was slowly dissipating. Looking at the golden giant, Lu Feng's shock did not diminish at all. He saw it clearly and understood it clearly. From the beginning to the end, the divine king of Netherworld did not have the slightest ability to fight back in front of his ancestor, the divine king. He had always been completely suppressed. Gradually, the endless darkness started to become transparent as the remnant consciousness of the divine king of Netherworld's projection disappeared. As for the golden divine king, he seemed to have reached his limit. In the next moment, he began to disperse completely. However, unlike the Yellow Springs divine king, the primogenitor divine king transformed into countless rays of light and countless runes. They danced, surged, and followed a mysterious and beautiful trajectory, pouring into Lu Feng's soul transformations, endless transformations. At this moment, Lu Feng felt that he had undergone an earth-shattering change. The shackles had been completely shattered. Countless true essences of power and countless surging bloodline powers were all released. Although he had wasted a lot of power to support the bronze great devil's projection, he was still able to control it. However, it wouldn't take long for this terrifying bloodline to condense again. They had already broken through the layers of barriers from the endless seals and had forever merged with Lu Feng's bloodline. The golden bloodline had already become Lu Feng's bloodline. It had already become the terrifying thing he relied on his path to the peak in the future. Such a change was complete. It was a complete change from his soul to his soul. After a moment, he saw light once again from the endless darkness. In front of him was an ancient door that had opened in a flash. Endless suppression and panic seemed to be able to swallow everything, just like the ultimate black hole of the universe. It lay quietly in front of Lu Feng. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng didn't move. He just stood there quietly. At this moment, he was most concerned about the changes in his body and the success of his transformation. He closed his eyes slightly and opened them after a long time. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes were filled with endless joy. This kind of surprise wasn't much worse than obtaining the Origin Sutra and the Great Devil True Body. I actually broke through to the intermediate warrior realm in an instant. The first realm of the Great Devil True Body, the Copper Body Great Devil Realm. After the bloodline awakening, I feel that my aptitude and strength seem to have undergone a terrifying upgrade. It's a transformation that surpasses any other. In the dark space, the power of the runes actually allowed my divine origin to open up and become several times stronger. This degree of opening has increased my comprehension and soul control ability by more than 10 times. Is all of this real? Who exactly did my bloodline come from? At this moment, Lu Feng finally remembered the great bloodline that his father had talked about during the holidays. At that time, his father had been wild with joy because he had become a psychic master. He had also said that he would tell Luo Yunyang everything when he returned. Now Lu Feng was looking forward to it. The strength of my bloodline is close to limitless. It's also in the form of a projection, but it can actually suppress the great ancient divine king of the underworld, the supreme divine king of the universe. Then, who is the ancestor of this bloodline? Who is my ancestor? After pondering for a moment, he thought of all the divine kings in history. In the blink of an eye, Lu Feng seemed to have remembered. At this moment, his body stiffened slightly, and his expression was one of disbelief. Am I his bloodline? Is this possible? He took a deep breath. Other than him, Lu Feng could not think of anyone else. After all, a race or civilization that wanted to destroy such a terrifying civilization had definitely reached the peak of the universe. The existence of something that could make a peak civilization of the universe go crazy, to the point that they did not hesitate to fight against a sub-peak civilization, was self-evident. Lu Feng knew that apart from the Divine King, he was the first existence to enter here. Legend had it that the god kings that had entered this place had not taken anything away from it. So if there was really something that could make a peak race go crazy, it must still be here. It's a pity that apart from me, apart from the Divine King, other existences probably don't know where the real door is. I'm afraid that even if they spend countless years, they will only put all their attention on the door-shaped lines and do everything they can to open it. Thinking of this, Lu Feng's face showed a trace of ridicule. After all, he already knew the origin of the ancient star and the existence of this Futu pagoda. If he wanted to use brute force to open this place, he would have to fight against this endlessly huge ancient star. To be able to do this, he was afraid that only the existence of the Divine King would be able to do it. Looking at the seal behind him that had closed and reappeared, Lu Feng did not hesitate. He had a feeling that if he wanted to get out of here, He would not have to go through such a terrifying life and death experience. He could walk out of here as long as he wanted. But if he wanted to come in again, it would be troublesome. Therefore, Lu Feng really did not want to give up this opportunity that he had exchanged with his life, even if he knew that there might be danger ahead. Lu Feng still did not know how, did not want, and could not give up. Then, let's go. Finally, he stepped into it. Chapter 58. Compared to what he saw from the outside world, the space in this huge Futu pagoda was too big. It was so big that he couldn't believe it was what he saw from the outside world. As expected of the ancient Fang civilization, a powerful existence second only to the peak race and civilization of the universe. Among them, there must be quasi-supreme existences. Otherwise, how could they build such a huge world? It's a pity that when this world was approaching perfection, it was completely shattered. Otherwise, a universe supreme level strong being like the Divine King would have appeared in the ancient Fang civilization, and the ancient Fang civilization would have entered the ranks of the peak race and civilization of the universe. This place was a world. It was a personal world evolved by an invincible being. He had placed his world here in order to store the true relics of the ancient Fang clan. He kept walking. But in the next moment, Lu Feng's expression suddenly changed, and it became extremely ugly. That's right. If that's really the case, then this time, didn't I come in vain? On his face, there was a trace of unwillingness and helplessness. I should have thought of this long ago. To be able to become a peak race or civilization of the universe, I'm afraid that the Divine King exists or once produced a Divine King. And this place had a quasi-supreme existence overseeing it, but it was still completely destroyed. Then presumably, among the races that collided with the ancient Fang civilization, there must be a Divine King overseeing it. Since the Divine King has taken action, is there anything left here? His footsteps stopped. Lu Feng didn't know if he should continue walking. After all, if it was really as he thought, then, what was the point of him going through so much trouble and experiencing life and death to come here? After thinking about it for a while, his tense face began to relax a little. However, the benefits I got this time are simply unimaginable. To be able to awaken the bloodline of the ancestor Divine King is already extremely precious, not inferior to the wealth of Tongtian Futu. In that case, so what if I can't get anything? Since I'm already here, let's go in and take a look. After all, I'm the first living being to have seen everything apart from the Divine King. Thinking of this, Lu Feng's footsteps finally landed again as he walked towards the depth. It had to be said that although the world constructed by a quasi-supreme wasn't perfect, it was close to perfection. Other than the fact that it didn't have the ability to completely evolve all kinds of principles and laws, it wasn't much different in size. A perfect world created by a God King expert, even if it was the weakest God King, would be able to create an infinitely vast perfect world. It wouldn't be much worse than a super-life planet. Lu Feng could naturally sense that the area of this place was probably not much smaller than Gufang's star below him. Even so, he still walked in. It wasn't that there was something wrong with Lu Feng's brain, but he had already seen it. He saw it. In the distance, there was an incomparably terrifying cave that seemed to connect to the heavens. The moment he entered, Lu Feng had already discovered the existence of the cave. Although it was incomparably huge and very far from here, Lu Feng could calculate that at his speed, he should be able to reach it in a day at most. Now, he had already become a copper-body great demon who had cultivated the first stage of the great demon true body to the realm of Deshang. Lu Feng's physical strength had intensified, and he had advanced to the level of an intermediate warrior. Lu Feng could feel that, because of the awakening of his bloodline, although 99% of the power was still hidden in his own bloodline, the mere trace of power that appeared was enough to strengthen and upgrade his physical body. The power in his physical body now was definitely not just at the level of 10 stars. According to the feeling that Lu Feng had once erupted with the power of 100 stars, at this moment, the power contained in his body was at least more than 40 stars. In other words, he was now at least an intermediate warrior. Moreover, Lu Feng also discovered something that surprised him. That was, the power in his punch just now seemed to have increased even more. Although he was not sure how much. But Lu Feng could be sure that the power increase of that punch was definitely not just 4 times as before. The awakening of the bloodline allowed him to complete the second transformation of his body. With his current speed, he could run 500 kilometers in an hour at full strength, and the horror of this primitive body was enough to support him running for several hours without reaching his limit. Therefore, after confirming that there was no danger around, Lu Feng began to speed up. It had to be said that Lu Feng's speculation was very accurate. He estimated that he should be able to reach the front of the huge cave in a day's time. And now, when he arrived in front of the crack that seemed to tear the world apart, almost a day had passed. When he was in front of it, Lu Feng really realized the horror of this crack. This was a kind of indescribable size. Visual inspection, just visual inspection, Lu Feng felt that this terrifying crack was hundreds of thousands of meters long. Looking from a distance, it was like a terrifying black hole that could swallow everything. And in front of this crack, Lu Feng saw an ancient altar that towered into the sky. It stood there quietly, as if it had not changed at all since ancient times. It was condensed with endless brilliance, rich with the imprint of trillions of time and space, and engraved with immortal and ancient civilization. Lu Feng took a deep breath. Looking at these miraculous buildings, he had an unprecedented shock. These were the condensation of a real civilization. Although modern technology could also create such huge buildings, or even more spectacular than this. However, all of that had a kind of flashy and virtual appearance. Losing the ancient solemnity and the accumulation of civilization, relying only on the accumulation of technology, at most, it gave people a kind of visual shock. It was far from being able to shock people's hearts. The ancient altar in front of him, if changed to a floor, was at most comparable to those high-rise buildings with thousands of floors. However, its existence was far from being comparable to any other building. This was because Lu Feng could feel a mighty energy fluctuation coming from the altar. What was condensed was a terrifying power that was beyond any imagination. Once it erupted, the world would be destroyed and the years would wither. In front of it, not to mention some 1,000-floor high-rise buildings, perhaps even the highest crystallization of the Federation's technology, those ultimate deterrent interstellar fortresses, would be completely inadequate. This is the last existence of the ancient civilization. Here, it should be where the last true essence and inheritance of the ancient civilization is merged. Could it be that that peak race didn't have a divine king powerhouse, or that the divine king powerhouse didn't come here? Lu Feng felt suspicious, because the altar in this place did not have the slightest trace of damage at all. Not even the slightest trace of damage. He could feel the terrifying protective power on the periphery of this place. If he wanted to enter here, he could only do it with absolute violence. But here there was really no damage at all. This made Lu Feng fall into doubt again. Finally, he no longer waited. He walked in the direction of the altar. Now, Lu Feng could be considered to have given up on his previous idea. The moment he saw the altar, he already understood that even if there was really some shocking wealth, something that even the divine king would be tempted by, it did not belong to him. After all, no matter how lucky he was now, he was just a mid-level warrior. Those seals, he really wanted to, but he was powerless. Gradually, Lu Feng was about to reach the bottom of the altar. But as he walked, Lu Feng's eyes became more and more shocked. The light in his eyes became more and more inconceivable. Unknowingly, he had already sped up to a degree that even he did not expect. He saw the divine king, That is the yellow spring steel. The yellow spring steel is actually condensed here. How is that possible? This kind of truth, this kind of majesty, this is definitely the true condensation of the yellow spring steel. What is the divine king of the yellow spring trying to do? What is he trying to do? Under the ancient altar, there were 3 almost solid existences floating quietly. And Lu Feng recognized one of them at a glance. That was the yellow spring steel. Compared to the illusory figure in the seal outside, the yellow spring steel here was too eye-catching. Because it was almost beyond the category of illusory figures. Lu Feng also recognized this appearance. This was a kind of martial path magical ability that could materialize. In order to maintain this state for thousands of years, what was needed was not something that the power of the seal could compare to. This was something that could only be achieved by someone who was at least a deity and had to specially condense it for a very long time. They had to constantly reflect their martial path incarnation and reinforce it over and over again. It would take a very long time for this martial path incarnation to leave the martial path's body and exist independently. This incarnation in front of him was the yellow spring steel. It was the immortal steel that represented countless bloodshed and glory throughout history. At this moment, it was actually condensed here by the divine king of the yellow spring. This was really too unbelievable. After all, condensing this yellow spring steel and casually setting up a seal could not be compared. However, why did the divine king of the yellow spring specially reflect his martial path incarnation here? Lu Feng could not understand. He felt a kind of confusion, a kind of unknown. However, Lu Feng could not understand the crux of this. After all, he was now too far away from the existence of the divine king. Not continuing to observe the yellow spring steel, Lu Feng looked at the existence beside it. In the beginning, he was slightly puzzled. However, as time passed, Lu Feng finally recognized what that thing was. At this moment, his face was filled with endless shock and completely changed. He looked at that ancient long sword and was speechless. Emperor's sword, this is the peerless divine weapon of that peerless godly king. It was condensed from his martial arts avatar and combined with countless technologies and refining techniques in the entire universe to create this peerless divine weapon, the heavenly Emperor's sword. The divine king of the heavens, one of the great divine kings of the human race, also entered here and even left his own peerless divine weapon here. What is the purpose of all this? Chapter 59. Lu Feng looked at the last existence anxiously. He had already vaguely guessed what it was. In the records, only 3 divine kings had truly walked into this place. The first divine king was the divine king of the netherworld who discovered this place. The second was the divine king of the heavenly emperor, and these 2 invincible existences had left their most precious and powerful things here. Then the remaining third existence, which could coexist with the netherworld monument and the heavenly emperor sword, was probably the last martial art avatar Tendra Lynx, as expected. It's him, the martial art avatar of the divine king of the heavenly emperor, the terrifying beast that could swallow heaven and earth and shatter the galaxy under its feet, the Tendra Lynx. As expected, he had appeared here as well. At this moment, Lu Feng kept sucking in cold air. The 3 peerless divine kings had left their most precious things here. What was all of this for? Could it be that they were going to collide here across space and time? To determine who was the most powerful peerless divine king in this endless space and time, the supreme of the universe. This was the only thought that Lu Feng could think of. This time, Lu Feng hesitated again. The things in front of him were too shocking. They were things that only the most extreme existences in the universe could appear. And he was only a mid-level warrior. There was still a huge gap between him and the gods. Even the gods couldn't touch these things. How could he not be afraid? Looking at the 3 great visions that belonged to the ancient divine king, Lu Feng hesitated slightly. But the next moment, he still took a step forward. No matter what, I'm already here. I must see what it is. This place is definitely closely related to the heavenly Futu in my mind space. This is the best opportunity. I must find out what the truth is. Biting hard, Lu Feng finally walked toward the ancient altar in the center surrounded by the three great visions. Step by step, step by step. Every step was done with extreme caution. Lu Feng knew that it was meaningless to be so careful. After all, no matter what kind of danger he encountered here, he had no hope of surviving. However, due to his nature, he had no choice but to raise his spirits. Soon, they arrived in front of the huge altar. At this time, Lu Feng felt that the sacrifice was even more indescribable. Tall and big. This was the appearance. However, this alone was not enough to make Lu Feng's soul tremble. Watching from such a close distance, Lu Feng was even more shocked. At this moment, the ancient solemnity, the trembling that came from the depths of his soul, and the feeling of desolation constantly assaulted his mind, making it difficult for him to stand. Just as Lu Feng's face was deathly pale and he was about to fall to the ground, the blood in his body began to boil. Endless golden light appeared and enveloped Lu Feng's entire body. Relying on the power of the boiling blood, Lu Feng finally stood still and was not completely destroyed by the ancient aura of the altar. Looking at the altar in front of him, Lu Feng could not believe that just a trace of aura was enough to make him completely collapse and decay. This was really too shocking. He believed that if someone else came here, as long as they had not opened up the god's domain and did not have a bloodline, even a true warrior would be instantly overwhelmed by the ancient and desolate aura and turn into nothingness. Only a god could resist the desolate aura that the ancient altar unintentionally emitted. Only a true god could do that. This was really hard to imagine. How powerful was the ancient civilization back then? The existence of such an altar is like an invincible weapon. If it is activated, I'm afraid even a god would be affected endlessly. Lu Feng was horrified. He stared at the terrifying altar, his eyes filled with endless shock. In his body, the boiling blood was becoming more and more powerful, more and more extreme. Lu Feng knew that his bloodline was most likely inherited from him, that invincible existence. But just an ordinary aura could not affect him at all. It could be said that if someone wanted to affect him, unless it was the will of a god, then only that kind of targeted oppressive aura could make him feel difficult. Although the sacrificial ground in front of him had a terrifying power that surpassed that of a god, after countless years of precipitation, it seemed to have fallen into a deep slumber. These unconscious auras, after Lu Feng's blood boiled, were unable to affect him too much. But why do I feel like there's something wrong? The Divine King was not born during the ancient civilization's most powerful period. But the ancient altar they condensed has already become so powerful that it has not awakened at all. Just the ancient and desolate aura it unintentionally emits can already affect gods and above. And the martial art incarnations of the three peerless Divine King don't emit the slightest majesty. It seems to be just a picture. This doesn't make sense, this really doesn't make sense. The martial art incarnations condensed by the Divine King, and even these incarnations that had undergone countless years of refinement, were absolutely terrifying to an extreme degree. As long as they existed, even if they were separated by layers of seals, they would still emit world-shaking power. This was the case with the seal outside. Back then, the Divine King of the Netherworld had probably just casually laid down the seal, but after such a long time, if one wanted to rely on brute force to open it, it would still require a god-level existence to do so. One had to know that what existed in the seal was only a trace of the Divine King of the Netherworld's brand and a projection of the Netherworld steel's power. And the martial art incarnations here were far from what the seal could compare to. There was no comparison between the two at all. But why were these three terrifying martial art incarnations not the slightest bit of effect? In the next moment, Lu Feng finally took a step onto the altar. And it was also at this moment that a kind of spiritual tremor occurred. This was a kind of shock that went straight to the depths of one's soul. It was an existence that had nothing to do with any bloodline or power. Cold sweat instantly flowed down his cheek. Lu Feng's face was pale. He realized that it was extremely difficult for him to even move a single step at the moment. Looking at the endless stairs, Lu Feng fell silent for a moment. Then, a trace of madness flashed in his eyes. His footsteps finally landed on the ground again. The second step, the third step. Step by step, Lu Feng began the extremely difficult climb. Every time he moved forward, there would be countless obstacles. The terrifying majesty in his soul would deepen by a lot, causing his movements to become sluggish. However, Lu Feng would forcefully pass through each obstacle every time. And Lu Feng realized that the more steps he walked, the firmer his willpower in the depths of his heart became. The firmness of one's willpower did not have any direct benefits for the cultivation of a warrior or a telekinesis master. After all, it was only an increase in willpower that could not bring about any improvement in strength. However, once there was an opportunity to sharpen one's willpower, no one would be willing to give it up. After all, the benefits of sharpening one's willpower could be said to be endless. In the early stages of the path, aptitude occupied a large part of it. However, once one reached the level of a deity, if one wanted to make further progress, it would not just be a matter of aptitude. After all, any existence that could become a deity was a genius that shocked the entire Federation and even the entire galaxy. Their aptitudes were about the same, and even the resources they received were not too different. However, the realm that they could reach in the end was different. The main reason for this was that they did not have true perseverance and the strongest willpower to truly reach the peak. This would determine the extent of their future development. Lu Feng already understood now. This ancient altar, the final place of worship of the ancient civilization, also had the function of sharpening one's willpower. This, to him, was really a little unexpected. Or perhaps this final place of worship was simply used to sharpen one's willpower. The aura of desolation on it is simply smelting a kind of endless and eternal glory, a kind of past of the era and civilization. Or perhaps it could be said that it could be created by the ancient Fang clan. This was specially created to sharpen those geniuses of the ancient Fang clan. However, even so, what can I do? Whether it was deliberately arranged or unconsciously released, what difference does it make to me? What I want is the peak. I want to reach the peak of this altar. Therefore, no matter what it is, as long as it does not cause me to die immediately, I will not stop my footsteps. This time, I will bet my future hope. To be honest, there were three main reasons why he wanted to reach the altar. First, he wanted to see what was buried in this final place of worship of the ancient civilization. Firstly, he wanted to hone his willpower. Lastly, he wanted to take a look at the terrifying crack and see what it was. From here, he could not see anything at all. After all, this crack was really, really big. Moreover, it was impossible to look at it directly from a close distance. After all, one had to pass through this ancient altar on the way to the crack. If he wanted to see the full picture of the crack, he had to pass through it. This was also one of the reasons why Lu Feng wanted to reach the altar in the beginning. However, at this moment, when Lu Feng was suppressed by this endless pressure, the unyielding madness in his heart was completely ignited. He had forgotten his own goal. All he had was the final peak. Perhaps those who know will say that I am stupid and ignorant. Even so, what can I do? I, Lu Feng, am the one and only Lu Feng in the entire universe. My decision is my path. For this reason, even if I have to be willful, even if I go crazy for once, so what? Chapter 60. Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a hint of unyieldingness and madness. He knew that, regardless of the reason, he had to go up. This wasn't just a test of the altar. It was also Lu Feng's reproach for his own soul. If he couldn't cross this threshold, then he wouldn't just lose an opportunity. He would lose his future hope and path. It could be said that Lu Feng had made the most irrational decision under the madness of his soul. However, it was also a decision that belonged solely to him. He had already casually gambled his fate on this trial. This was the real Lu Feng. Back then, he had clearly known that he didn't have the slightest talent for cultivation, yet he had still persevered for 7 years. Even though he hadn't been able to condense even half a star's power, he hadn't given up. He had still trained frantically. This was Lu Feng's stubbornness and insanity. Without insanity, how could one have a sharp edge? Without a sharp edge, how could one be called Lu Feng? Before he knew it, Lu Feng had already walked up more than 100 steps. Thanks to the continuous tempering, he had become more and more accustomed to the desolate aura's pressure. Although the pressure on each step was constantly increasing, the extent of the increase couldn't be compared to Lu Feng's adaptation. After a long time, Lu Feng had already walked up more than 1,000 steps. At this point, Lu Feng's every step was extremely heavy, yet he was also extremely determined. He didn't know when it started, but the desolate aura seemed to be getting denser and denser, making his steps heavier and heavier. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng had never given up. Therefore, he was persistent, tenacious, and strong. When he raised his head and looked at the boundless peak, Lu Feng took a deep breath and stopped for the time being. Bloodlines are indeed a very peculiar and great thing. It's no wonder that those divine descendants are superior. Their starting point is already far beyond that of ordinary people. I've already spent nearly a day climbing these thousands of stairs. I can feel that under the boiling of my bloodline, I don't seem to have consumed any energy at all. If it was during normal times, even though he could survive without eating or drinking for a few days, he would still feel a kind of hunger and thirst. But now, with his blood boiling, Lu Feng felt that he was still at the peak. As long as my body can take it, I will keep going. I must reach the final destination. After resting for a while, Lu Feng finally started climbing again. Unknowingly, another day had passed. At this time, Lu Feng had already walked past the 2,000th step. At this time, he was already sweating profusely. Every step he took was incomparably heavy. Starting from 2,000, it was another powerful increase, and another pressure was weighing down on him. The intensity of the desolate aura made it difficult for him to move. However, this kind of pressure did not make Lu Feng have the slightest intention of giving up. All the trials and tribulations had instead aroused his fighting spirit. Flames of madness began to burn in his eyes. He knew that this was another barrier of his willpower. If he continued to walk, there would be a moment when he could relax. If he retreated now, he would probably stop here for the rest of his life. And it was only now that Lu Feng understood that this path of training his willpower could be called a path of no return. If he retreated, it would leave a shadow in his heart. If he wanted to improve in the future, it would be extremely limited. The only way was to keep climbing. As long as he transcended everything, as long as he walked to the final destination, he would be able to break the shackles of his heart. He would then have enough courage and willpower to face any difficulties. In 2 days, I have already walked past the 2,000th step. If this goes on, my speed might slow down later. But I still have to continue. In comparison, the Federal University's entrance ceremony is not that important, although he might miss the Federal University's opening ceremony, and might even delay his enrollment. For Lu Fenglai, it was all worth it. After all, the Federal University's courses, other than the necessary cultural classes, were only available to specially enrolled students like him. And as a psychic, what Lu Feng had to learn in his first year was only some simple mechanical operations. Among them, there would not even be the theory of using spiritual power to split. For Lu Fenglai, these were not essential. Therefore, even if he missed the opening ceremony, Lu Feng did not feel that it was a big deal. No matter what, I have to continue walking on this path. Once I fail, then no matter how heaven-defying I am, I will only be a god. For me, this is not enough, not enough. If it was in the past, then for Lu Fenglai, becoming a god was already a dream that he did not even dare to think about. Back then, he only wanted to become a beginner warrior. But when Lu Feng opened his mind space and obtained his own treasures, he already understood that being a warrior was no longer something that he could only hope for. However, when he saw the countless geniuses and felt their incomparable nobility, Lu Feng secretly swore that he would definitely strive for the realm of a god in this life. In the end, when the bloodline that belonged to him awakened, Lu Feng understood that he had completely transformed. He did not lose to any peerless geniuses. In fact, he was even nobler and greater than them. He wanted to shatter the shackles of fate. His goal was not to make people feel pain and regret, nor was it to become an existence that others admired. What he wanted was the true peak, the strongest peak that nothing could restrain. He wanted to shatter the shackles of fate. He wanted to shatter all obstacles. Therefore, how could being a god be enough? How could it be? On this path, there was no turning back. If he wanted to walk, he wanted to walk to the end, to walk to the peak. Finally, Lu Feng once again set foot on the journey. A total of 11 days had passed. In these 11 days, Lu Feng had walked until he was completely exhausted, until his mind was weak. However, he never took a step back. Even before the 9,000 checkpoint, he still had no intention of stopping. Strong, this was an absolute strength. His belief was firm, and after these 11 days of continuous tempering, Lu Feng felt that his willpower had also become incomparably tough. At this moment, even if he faced those disasters, he was confident that he could overcome them and surpass them. During these 11 days of travel, Lu Feng was constantly undergoing the baptism of endless desolation. These auras made him feel a kind of loneliness between heaven and earth, a kind of endless sadness. Unknowingly, his heart was also slowly transforming. It was transforming towards a realm that only the strong could achieve. At this moment, even if those geniuses appeared again, they would not make him feel the slightest bit of excitement. This was not only because of the increase in aptitude brought about by the appearance of the bloodline, but also because the endless tempering had enlightened his soul. 9,999. One more step, and I will enter the 10,000th rank. I'm afraid that this will be the most difficult checkpoint since I climbed this ancient altar. However, none of this can stop me, and none of this can make me compromise at all. In the end, I still have to walk up. Looking up, Lu Feng could faintly see the altar at the top. His heart was also burning with passion. When he looked up from below, Lu Feng felt that this altar was incomparably tall, and he could barely see the top. But now, he was about to reach the 10,000th rank. In front of him, he could even see a ray of light at the top. This kind of progress was completed unknowingly. Everything was achieved through his hard work. Therefore, he was confident that he would be able to reach the peak of the world. The 10,000th, I am coming. Looking at everything around him, looking at everything in front of him, Lu Feng was at a loss and he was in a daze. He still remembered clearly that when he took the last step, an incomparably terrifying aura of desolation washed over him, causing him to almost lose himself. It was also at this moment that he ignited his endless madness and finally steadily walked up the 10,000-step staircase. However, just as he was about to relax, everything changed completely. Lu Feng felt the pressure on his body, the terrifying aura of desolation around him, and the ancient altar had all disappeared. Everything had strangely disappeared and completely ceased to exist. Suddenly, Lu Feng was shocked to discover that he was no longer the same person he used to be. Perhaps he was only a mid-level warrior, and this kind of strength was really nothing in the entire Federation's warrior system. However, he was still an existence that far surpassed ordinary people. He was an existence that only appeared in a few thousand people. However, at this moment, the strength that he was so proud of was already in his body. His body was so frail, so weak, so small. Stretching out his arms and looking at his tender hands, Lu Feng couldn't believe that this was himself. However, the feeling that came from the depths of his soul made him believe that this was Lu Feng, this was his own body. What the hell is going on? He looked at his surroundings in shock and confusion. Gradually, all of his memories began to fade away. In the forest, the sun shone through and dyed the ground green. The flowers were tender and beautiful, but everything was so out of place. Because it was the height of spring, but a young child was sitting on a big rock, crying helplessly. His name was Lu Feng, and he was the son of a villager. Since he was young, he had lived in the turmoil of war. Although he had never experienced the sorrow of being homeless and destitute, his life had been very difficult. For as long as he could remember, he hadn't eaten a full meal, and he hadn't enjoyed a happy childhood. However, that difficult past was so worth remembering for the current him. It was so happy for him. Chapter 61. Countless tears streamed down his face, wetting the limestone he was sitting on. After crying for a long time, Lu Feng seemed to be tired. He raised his head and looked at the bright and beautiful sky. His eyes were filled with a maturity that did not match his age. When he thought of how his parents had died under the cavalry for him, countless tears streamed down his face. In this life, I must accomplish great things and fulfill my parents' last hope. In a daze, Lu Feng seemed to recall the countless times his parents had lovingly hugged him and repeatedly said those words. Our Feng is destined to do great things. In the future, when you do great things, when others see us, they will say, look, that's Lu Feng's parent. His child has done great things. Tightly clenching his fists, young Lu Feng's eyes once again flashed with a trace of determination. Finally, that feeling of exhaustion caused him to fall into a deep sleep. Gradually, Lu Feng grew up with the help of the villagers. Later, he left the village for a full 5 years. When he returned 5 years later, many of the villagers did not recognize him anymore. However, in the remaining years, he worked hard and was willing to help others, gaining the goodwill of the villagers. Gradually, he got married and married a beautiful girl from a neighboring village. The man worked in the fields while the woman assisted her husband and taught the children. Their lives were carefree. Gradually, Lu Feng had children. And because of the unification of the world, life was gradually getting better. The children played happily every day. Lu Feng looked at them kindly, just like his parents did in the past. The days passed by just like that. Lu Feng seemed to have forgotten the hope of his childhood. He had forgotten the vow he had secretly made. Unfortunately, good times did not last long. The current emperor was old and gradually could not manage the imperial court. Moreover, the candidate for the crown prince had not been decided for a long time. There were only 2 princes in the current celestial empire. The first prince was kind-hearted and diligent in governance and loved the people. The second prince, on the other hand, was an ambitious and ruthless person. Originally, according to the opinions of many officials, the first prince was the most suitable candidate for the throne. However, the current emperor seemed to favor the second prince, and even had the intention of making him the crown prince. If not for the obstruction of many officials, the throne would have been decided. The 2 princes began to fight both openly and covertly. Unfortunately, the second prince had conquered many places and enjoyed endless glory and power in the military. In the entire celestial empire, apart from the current emperor, no one else could take away his enormous military power. The first prince suffered setbacks everywhere, and the battle between the 2 continued to escalate. Bastard. You're all bastards. Let my mother go, let my mother go. Scram. Whoosh, his sword was unsheathed, and his young face froze, filled with terror and fear. Father! They killed Big Brother! They killed Big Brother! Little brats so annoying! Blood splattered again, and yet another young figure disappeared, withering away. Father! Save me! Save me! Clang! Blood's blood! I'll kill you all! Lu Feng went berserk and charged towards those officers with all his might. However, he was unarmed and heavily injured, and he could not defeat those powerful officers. In the end, he collapsed in a pool of blood. He looked at his dead wife and son, and at the ashes of his house. There was a trace of regret and despair in his eyes. He could still vaguely remember the words that the Emperor had said to him in the midst of the chaos when he was young. Good, I like you, child. Follow me, and you'll be my adopted son. In the future, you'll have a share of this world. At that time, he was hot-blooded and heroic. However, after countless life and death experiences, he gradually became afraid. The closer he was to death, the more he feared death. On the night before the decisive battle, his adoptive father had given him a difficult task. If he succeeded, his name would go down in history and he would be a loyal official who founded the country. If he failed, he would be reduced to ashes and bones. However, at this important moment, he retreated. He actually became a deserter. The divine army was defeated. The divine army took advantage of the victory, and after the battle, the country was settled. No one knew that the outcome of this epic battle would be decided by only one person. Lu Feng's eyes were already closed. After a long time, Lu Feng gradually woke up. He realized that he was not dead. It was just that his body had suffered injuries that were difficult to heal. Looking at the completely ruined village, Lu Feng's eyes had lost all light. Dragging his battered body, he found some medicinal herbs and slowly treated his injuries. He was the only one left in the once peaceful village. Lu Feng was still alive. He was only alive now on this day. Heavy rain poured down, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. The entire village was shaken by the terrifying lightning. Lu Feng sat on the boat, his eyes still lifeless and lifeless. However, at night, the sound of countless soldiers fighting came from outside the door. After a long time, the sound gradually stopped. At this moment, his door was opened. There were two people. One of them was covered in blood. Lu Feng could feel that he would not live for long. The other was old, and seemed to have suffered from the shock just now. He was on the verge of death. They looked at Lu Feng and finally sighed deeply. Give this to the second prince. You will receive a lifetime of glory and wealth. Remember, you have to give it to the second prince personally. The old man trembled and finally fell to the ground. The bodyguard struggled to take out a roll of silk from his bosom and handed it to Lu Feng. Faced with this, Lu Feng's eyes finally flashed with a trace of emotion. He took the scroll in his hand and looked at the lifeless bodyguard. At this moment, he suddenly laughed. He remembered. He still remembered clearly. Even though he was old and clumsy and was no longer as majestic as before. However, Lu Feng still remembered it clearly. He could have today's status because of him, Lu Feng. Who would have thought that fate would arrange it like this? At his last moment, he actually had to rely on him, Lu Feng, to let this vast country produce a new monarch. Taking the scroll, Lu Feng recognized that it was an imperial edict. On it there was still some ink that had not yet dried, and there was a bright red mark. Finally, Lu Feng walked out of the door. At this moment, he suddenly laughed wildly. Laughing so crazily. The promise from my childhood, I remember. Father, mother, your son's promise, I remember. I, Lu Feng, remember. On the altar, Lu Feng's body was almost illusory. Countless desolate auras lingered and had already begun to invade Lu Feng's body. His life fluctuations became weaker and weaker, as if the flame of life would be extinguished in the next moment. However, at this moment, a shadow appeared behind Lu Feng. It was a pagoda, an indescribably huge and indescribable heaven-reaching futu. It only had one level, a towering peak that was forever hidden in endless haze, and nothing could be seen. Heaven-reaching futu. That was the incomparably mysterious heaven-reaching futu in Lu Feng's mind space. Now, at the moment when Lu Feng's life was about to wither away, it actually appeared. The appearance of heaven-reaching futu was a kind of power that surpassed any words. Power was limitless and began to emanate. In an instant, the entire ancient altar began to tremble. And it was also at this moment that the three peerless martial art avatars that the divine king of the universe had condensed with all his strength actually all woke up. Endless majesty also soared into the sky. In this quasi-perfect world, it constantly emanated a kind of extreme majesty. Just a trace of this kind of power, this kind of majesty, was enough to make the entire planet tremble, and it was enough to obliterate any godly great beings. However, at this moment, the martial art avatars of the three great divine king of the universe were actually unable to shake heaven-reaching futu in the slightest. Lu Feng's body had already begun to wither, and the aura of desolation had invaded his body as he walked to the brink of death. However, the appearance of heaven-reaching futu seemed to be Lu Feng's most powerful protection. It constantly condensed countless auras that surpassed any other kind of aura and began to inject them into Lu Feng's body, causing him to actually gradually recover. The three peerless martial art avatars of the divine king of the universe finally began to retreat under the powerful majesty. In the end, they lost the feeling of recovery, and the matchless majesty disappeared, returning to tranquility once again in that illusory world. 3 days gradually passed. And in these 3 days, Lu Feng had experienced too much. From the moment he left home until now, Lu Feng knew that he had already fallen into the dispute of the dynasty's throne. One after another, countless people had already come to hunt him down. Lu Feng also understood that once he was found by any group of people, he would definitely end up dead. If it was before, so be it if he died. But now, he couldn't die. He still had one last thing to do. He still had to fulfill the promise of the past. How could he die? With the help of the experiences he had when he was young, Lu Feng was finally able to evade countless pursuers. However, Lu Feng also knew that he didn't have long to live. These days, he had suffered countless injuries, and his body, which had never fully recovered, had already reached its limit. If it wasn't for the last bit of faith in his heart, he would have died long ago. Finally, after using various disguises, Lu Feng still managed to sneak into the imperial city. The reason why he had risked his life to come here, apart from the fact that he didn't have much time left, was more because today was his last chance. Today was the 3rd day after the assassination of the current emperor. It was also the day of worship and the day of the election of a new emperor. Therefore, Lu Feng had to come here today. This was his only chance and also his last chance. After entering the city, Lu Feng didn't hesitate and directly rushed to the final place of worship. At this moment, there was already a sea of people there. Countless people were dressed in mourning clothes, sobbing, real or fake. As for Lu Feng, he was the only one left standing. Chapter 62. Gradually, some people noticed Lu Feng and wanted to reprimand him. But at this moment, Lu Feng took out the posthumous edict left behind by the deceased emperor. The emperor's posthumous edict is here. Everyone, listen. This voice shocked everyone. The thousands of subjects were stunned, not knowing what to do. Lu Feng held the imperial edict high and walked step by step towards the summit. The two princes knelt in front of everyone. They raised their heads slightly, their eyes shining. Finally, Lu Feng walked to the summit. At this moment, he looked down on everyone, his eyes cold. The corners of his mouth curved upwards, but no one could see it. Suddenly, he opened the imperial edict. But at this moment, an arrow flew out of nowhere and directly pierced Lu Feng's body. Blood splattered everywhere. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the two princes stood up, wanting to fight for the supreme edict that concerned the fate of the dynasty. But at the last moment, Lu Feng forced himself to stand in place. His eyes were shining with a brilliance that had never been seen before. It seemed to be able to see through everything, to compete with the brilliance of the sun and moon. A loud shout suppressed the two princes and everyone else who was about to make a move. In the next moment, Lu Feng opened the imperial edict and used the loudest voice he had ever used in his life to make a sudden announcement. The emperor's throne will be passed on, first Prince Qing Long. At the last moment, Lu Feng finally fell. The imperial edict in his hand was stained with blood. The once striking second prince had gradually disappeared, and not a single word could be seen. And no one around him paid any attention to him. No matter who became the emperor, it was expected. But when this moment really arrived, it still caused endless chaos. No one saw Lu Feng's strange eyes in the pool of blood. "My child, my wife, I've finally avenged you, so I never forgot the promise I made." Gradually, his body began to turn cold. Finally, the flame of life was completely extinguished. Beside Lu Feng, countless people were excitedly arguing about something. In the distance, the large word "foundation" above the previous emperor's coffin was so striking, so solemn, and so ironic no one paid attention to Lu Feng anymore. No one knew that this simple and lowly ant in everyone's eyes had changed history twice, changing the direction of the world. Standing in the same place, everything around him was still the same. But Lu Feng's eyes seemed to have experienced endless vicissitudes of life. He stretched out his hand, looking at the arm full of vitality, and felt the powerful strength within. Finally, a smile crept onto his face. "So, everything was an illusion. A test. This is a test. In the end, at the end of my life, I made up my mind and found the promise I made in the past. My will, in the end, to return to its original position. In the end, I did not to lose." Lu Feng had already understood. He knew that everything he had experienced was a test. Although he didn't know the consequences of losing his way, Lu Feng believed that if he didn't find the path he had set in the past, he wouldn't be able to find any path in the end. Fortunately, he had walked over in the end and returned to the top of the staircase. Lu Feng raised his hand and looked at the time on the sky network. A strange look flashed across his eyes. In that illusion, he had already experienced a lifetime. However, in reality, less than an hour had passed. All of this really felt like a dream. Zhuang Xing dreamed of a butterfly, or perhaps a butterfly dreamed of a Zhuang Xing. At this moment, Lu Feng had such an illusion. Lu Feng raised his head and looked at the staircase after 10,000 steps. He took a deep breath. Previously, when he had reached the 10,000th step, he had already felt that he had reached his limit. However, now that he had woken up from this test, Lu Feng suddenly felt that the so-called pressure and staircase he had experienced before were really nothing. Finally, he took another step. Compared to the path before, it was much, much easier. Lu Feng resumed his previous speed of climbing 1,000 steps a day. And this speed was maintained by him all the way. In the blink of an eye, another 11 days had passed. This time, Lu Feng finally reached the second checkpoint. At this moment, although he was much better than when he had reached the 10,000th step. However, he was also extremely tired. He looked at the staircase that he still couldn't see the top of. Lu Feng smiled slightly and then walked into it again. Feeling that he had once again become a child, Lu Feng did not feel the slightest bit of shock this time. He seemed to have grasped something. Therefore, Lu Feng had become able to accept the change in the scene in front of him. What is it this time? Lu Feng lived in a poor family. However, unlike those common villagers, his father was a man of true learning. Since he was a child, his requirements for Lu Feng had been unusually strict. Lu Feng also lived up to his father's expectations. Although he was young, he had already performed exceptionally well. He was known far and wide as a little prodigy. Since he was a child, Lu Feng had been influenced by his father and was determined to be a good official who served the people. In addition to the necessary knowledge, he also dabbled in the history of both ancient and modern times. Finally, Lu Feng, who had performed extraordinarily at a young age, began to become famous. Almost the entire county had his legend. This year, the emperor happened to come to the county where Lu Feng lived when he went south to play. Hearing the name of the prodigy, the emperor was surprised to see Lu Feng. This year, Lu Feng was already 10 years old. Since he was a child, he had been more intelligent than ordinary people and had a photographic memory. In addition, he had read a lot of books and poems and was well versed in both ancient and modern times. As soon as they met, the emperor fell deeply in love with this child, who was more ambitious than the heavens. When the emperor returned to the capital, he personally issued a decree to allow Lu Feng to participate in the examination the next year. Lu Feng did not disappoint. He performed well and directly entered the court examination. Although he did not become the top scorer, his name spread throughout the dynasty. That year, Lu Feng was 11 years old. Time passed by slowly. Year after year, Lu Feng finally reached the end of the palace examinations. In the past, he had participated in the court examination every year. However, the ambitious Lu Feng did not stop until he became the top scorer. When the emperor was pleased with his ambition, he actually allowed him to do so. This year, Lu Feng came to the court examination for the last time. This time, he finally got what he wanted. He became the unparalleled top scorer of the year. This year, Lu Feng was 15 years old. As the years passed, Lu Feng gradually grew up. As his reputation spread, everyone in the imperial court knew of his prodigy name. The current emperor entrusted him with an important task, letting him govern a region. Lu Feng never forgot his childhood ambition. He always followed the example of the ancient sages and worked hard to govern. He turned the barren hills and turbulent rivers into a place with clear water and great rivers, and his name spread for a time. This year, Lu Feng was 19 years old. After 4 years of governance, his achievements were obvious. The emperor was pleased. He stood his ground and summoned Lu Feng to the court to serve. Lu Feng did not disappoint the emperor. He was cautious and conscientious. He was strict with himself at all times and managed his affairs well. The voices of discussion in and out of the court disappeared. This year, Lu Feng was 24 years old. Lu Feng obtained the recognition of the entire nation. From then on, he skyrocketed, shattering countless age restrictions and beginning his path to the imperial court. This year, Lu Feng was 27 years old. The emperor was old and no longer cared about governance. He delegated Lu Feng to a high official to govern a province. That year, Lu Feng got married. Glory and splendor reigned supreme. Lu Feng continued to serve the people, and earned the name Clear Heaven. However, it was during this time that he used his authority to help his wife's children. This year, Lu Feng was 33 years old. The old emperor was anxious and summoned Lu Feng back to the court as a high official. The second time, Lu Feng used his authority to buy a mansion for himself. It was during this period that Lu Feng learned how to bully those at the top and hide from those at the bottom. This year, Lu Feng was 40 years old. The emperor passed away, and a new emperor ascended the throne. He ruled the world and became the new ruler. The new emperor obeyed the late emperor's orders and delegated the power of the court to Lu Feng. From then on, Lu Feng took the position of prime minister for the first time. For a period of time, his glory was limitless and he had a great reputation. This time, Lu Feng felt that he was getting older. He started to guide the younger generation of countless families, disregarding their talents and appointing people based on their connections. This year, Lu Feng was 49 years old. The new emperor had a weak body. He worked hard but did not have a strong body. Not long after taking the throne, he fell ill and delegated power to Lu Feng. From then on, Lu Feng began his life of ruling the court alone. During these 3 years, Lu Feng controlled the imperial examinations, purged his political enemies, and took control of the military. For a period of time, he actually had the title of Half-Emperor Lu. Everyone in the court acted according to Lu Feng's expression. This year, Lu Feng was 57 years old. The emperor passed away and 3 new emperors ascended the throne. The new emperor was young, and Lu Feng had complete control of the court. For a period of time, he could do whatever he wanted. During these years, the barbarian race had invaded, and the people had no way of making a living. Unfortunately, Lu Feng did not take any action. For a period of time, the people were filled with resentment. This year, Lu Feng was 67 years old. There was a drought, and starving people were everywhere. To protect his own interests, Lu Feng ignored the lives of the people. This year, countless people prayed for Lu Feng to wake up. This year, Lu Feng was 69 years old. Floods spread, and the people had no way of making a living. Bandits ran rampant, and uprisings were everywhere. No one trusted Lu Feng, and his reputation was terrible. He was despised by the people. This year, Lu Feng was 72 years old. The dynasty was weak, and the barbarian race was strong. They burned, killed, and pillaged, committing all sorts of crimes. Lu Feng started to organize a counterattack, but it had little effect. This year, Lu Feng was 74 years old. For the sake of righteousness, even if he died, he would not regret it. The uprising stopped, and numerous volunteer armies formed to resist the barbarian race. However, there were many casualties. Lu Feng was old, but due to his strong control, he still controlled the court. This year, Lu Feng was 75 years old. Chapter 63. When Lu Feng saw the countless deaths and injuries, as well as the faces of those who had never regretted their actions, he came to a realization and hated himself. This time, he issued a conscription order in the imperial court, dispersing his family's wealth, executing hundreds of court officials, and confiscating all of their assets. Moreover, among these people who were executed, there was even Lu Feng's direct bloodline. For a time, the power inside and outside the imperial court was all gone, but Lu Feng handed it all back to the new emperor. After everything was done, Lu Feng personally went to the battlefield in his old body. This year, Lu Feng was 77 years old. After a year of war, the power of the imperial court was once again returned to the hands of the current emperor. Surprisingly, the current emperor did not deal with Lu Feng, but instead allowed him to continue guarding the borders. Finally, during a great battle, Lu Feng's old body fell completely ill. The millions of subjects felt complicated. They did not know whether to hate or be shocked. At the last moment, Lu Feng, with his frail body, fought on the endless battlefield with a 3-foot-long sword. In the end, Lu Feng was shot by hundreds of arrows, but he did not fall. Life, death, finally, this final battle changed the situation. The dynasty used up all its resources and drove away the barbarians, bringing glory to the land of the divine prefecture. After that, Lu Feng's body was transported back to the imperial capital. The streets were empty and countless people cursed Lu Feng. Disdain could be seen everywhere. At the last moment, the new emperor appeared and threw Lu Feng's body out of the carriage in front of the people. He cursed Lu Feng's past in front of the people. However, just when everyone thought it was over, the new emperor suddenly knelt down and cried bitterly. He recounted all of Lu Feng's past achievements. The millions of subjects fell silent, and finally knelt down to the body. The Prime Minister's life is more important than the sky, but his achievements are also greater than the sky. This time, the merits offset the demerits. The new emperor rejected everything, carried Lu Feng's body on his back, and walked step by step towards the imperial mausoleum. On the altar, Lu Feng finally opened his eyes. This time, there was a feeling of endless vicissitudes. Looking at the distant road ahead, all the pressure seemed to vanish at this moment. Lu Feng knew that he had succeeded again. At the last moment, he suddenly came to a realization. He thought of the great wish he had once made, and thought of the truth he had held fast to. He had finally found his true self. The wish he had made had been rediscovered in the end. Step by step, Lu Feng continued to climb. This time, it took Lu Feng 12 days. When he finally reached the 19,999 steps, Lu Feng stopped in his track. He looked ahead with a complicated expression. At this time, Lu Feng understood that as long as he took another step forward, he would enter that kind of environment again. To be honest, I really don't want to go through this again. It could be said that although he still had the appearance of a young man. However, Lu Feng had already lived 2 lives. Perhaps it was just a matter of a few hours. However, for Lu Fenglai it was indeed 2 lifetimes. Experiencing that kind of vicissitudes was really unbearable for him. However, in the end, Lu Feng still didn't give up. Once again, he withstood the endless pressure and walked up the stairs of 20,000 steps. Lu Feng, can you not be so timid? If you are so afraid of death, you will never become a powerhouse in this lifetime. A middle-aged man kept scolding a young man. However, in the face of this, the young man always had a humble smile on his face. He kept nodding his head. His pious appearance made it hard for anyone to bear saying anything. Looking at Lu Feng's appearance, the middle-aged man finally sighed deeply and stopped scolding him. Lu Feng, I remember that you weren't like this when you first came up the mountain. Back then, you were full of youthful energy and had the ambition to become a powerhouse. However, look at what you have become now. If this goes on, I'm afraid you won't even be able to defeat a new disciple in the future, let alone a powerhouse. After hearing this, Lu Feng kept nodding his head but didn't say anything. In the end, the middle-aged man sighed deeply and turned around to leave. He muttered to himself, what a pity. With such exceptional talent, there is no hope of becoming a powerhouse in this lifetime with such cowardice. In the blink of an eye, 100 years had passed. During this period, the sect had experienced ups and downs of various sizes. During these 100 years, a peerless genius had finally appeared and led the sect to prosperity. However, the good times didn't last long. That genius was too ostentatious. Before he reached the peak, he had already made enemies everywhere. In the end, the hidden powerhouses of the ancient sects took action and killed him on the spot. Following his death, the once prosperous sect also started to decline. Some sects that had previously held grudges against each other started to oppress other sections. That year, frost and snow covered the mountain. The cold was bone-piercing. Lu Feng stood among the many disciples at the mountain gate. He retreated timidly. His eyes were flickering with incomparable horror. According to seniority, Lu Feng was at least the Grandmaster's generation. However, he was now hiding behind the disciples who had just entered the sect. Such a scene was disgusting. However, at this moment, no one laughed at him. That was because they didn't have the mood to tease this trash of a Grandmaster. At this moment, there were tens of thousands of figures floating in front of the sect. They were floating in mid-air. Power filled the sky and pressure was present. These people could all fly. They were powerhouses who had cultivated to a certain level. Now they were gathered here for only one purpose, and that was to destroy the sect. In the front were 7 ancient figures. They didn't speak. With just a slight movement they could change heaven and earth and make time dim. It was these 7 existences that made the existence of the sect feel despair. That was because they knew that these 7 existences were true powerhouses at the peak. They were true monsters that had not appeared for countless years in those ancient sections. Once, when the sect was at its peak, they encountered such a monster and were almost unable to resist at all. Now they were facing 7 of them. In the next moment, an ancient existence gently waved his arm. At this moment, heaven and earth shook and space became chaotic. Tens of thousands of figures attacked at the same time. The mountain gate's protection collapsed in an instant. The figures landed and began a bloody massacre. Many elders and disciples of the sect fell into a pool of blood in an instant. The only ones who had the strength to fight, the sect master and the Grand Master, were completely killed by those old monsters. Everyone knew that the sect was finished. Lu Feng hid behind those trembling new disciples. His body was also trembling. He watched the countless figures in front of him fall continuously. He watched as those who were once his peers and juniors fought bloody battles. His eyes flickered with fear. Finally, Lu Feng pulled the disciple in front of him. Xiao Feng, Grandmaster knows a way out of here. Hurry up and leave with Grandmaster. Hearing this, the trembling body in front of him suddenly stopped. Lu Feng felt this disciple's performance and was delighted. He was about to pull him away immediately. However, he used a little strength and did not move him at all. When he turned around, what he saw was a pair of eyes filled with endless anger. Grandmaster, I know that you are overflowing with talent and know that you are unparalleled. Others may not understand, but I understand and understand. Do you know why you are still unable to shatter the void and step out of this world with such powerful strength? Actually, the reason for all of this is not because your strength is not enough, but because you are not qualified to walk out of here. Your cowardice, your incompetence, cannot be recognized by the heart of the strong. You can only be a coward in this life. You are a coward. After saying this, Xiao Feng did not hesitate. He actually rushed up and began to fight the enemies directly. It was just a pity that even those sect's powerhouses were not a match for these killers. What ability did he, a new disciple who had entered the sect for less than 10 years, have? In an instant, fresh blood filled the sky and his body collapsed. Looking at that fading life, Lu Feng was dumbstruck. Until the moment he died, Lu Feng did not make a move either. It was not that he did not have the ability, but that he did not dare. Grandmaster, you are so powerful. Why do you have to appear so weak? Grandmaster, thank you for teaching me. It's a pity that my talent is dull. Otherwise, I could have earned some strength. Grandmaster, I heard that back then your aura was also higher than the heavens. But now, how did you become like this? Don't go on like this. You are a powerhouse, a super powerhouse who is countless times more powerful than Ancestor Skyblue. You have to have the aura that matches your powerhouse. Grandmaster, actually, the reason for all of this is not because your strength is not enough, but because you don't have the qualifications to walk out of here. Your cowardice, your incompetence, cannot be recognized by the heart of the strong. You can only be a coward in this life. You are a coward. Lu Feng already could not hear anything. He looked at those dead senior and junior brothers in front of him. Feeling their souls dissipating, countless emotions flashed past his eyes. But among them, there was no longer the expression that he often had, cowardice. Hurry up and make a move. Activate the extermination grand array and annihilate all of these cultivators' souls in one go for me. Don't let them have the possibility of recovering again. There's still one that slipped through the net? Isn't this that trash ancestor? Indeed known as the disgrace of cultivators. I really don't know how he lived for so many years. Killing him, even I feel that it will dirty my hands. Some people passed by Lu Feng's side. Looking at him who was in a daze, they actually did not make a move. Or perhaps Lu Feng's reputation previously was too great. These people already disdained to make a move against him. They shuttled back and forth continuously, starting to lay down the extermination grand array. They wanted to annihilate these cultivators' souls in one go, preventing them from reincarnating or being reborn. Finally, the grand array was about to be completed. But right at this moment, a laughter rang out, directly shaking heaven and earth, directly shattering the firmament. The hundreds of powerhouses who could fly in the air in the surroundings instantly vomited blood and flew backward, losing their life aura in an instant. Chapter 64. Countless people's gazes froze as they looked in the same direction. But in the next moment they were all shocked. Because there was only one person in their eyes, a person who was laughing crazily, a person they could not imagine. Lu Feng. The person who was called trash, the scum of the cultivator world, the weakest person, was laughing crazily at this moment. The aura around him surged crazily, instantly strangling everything. Such power is, an ancient monster was shocked. They looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. A Heaven Breaker cultivator. He has already reached the peak of the Heaven Breaker stage. In our sect, only the oldest progenitors can achieve this level of strength. He actually has such strength. How is this possible? Impossible, but that did not mean that it did not exist. Lu Feng was a cultivator of the heaven-breaking realm. He was above the heavens and could already shatter the dome of heaven and enter another world. No one would have thought that this trash actually had such a powerful cultivation base. How old is he? The ancestors of our sect are already 1,000 years old, and he seems to be only 100 years old. How can he have such strength? Could it be that those legends of trash were all deliberately performed by him? No. His sect has already been completely wiped out. What's the point of his performance now? These people were shocked and panicked. A Heaven Breaker cultivator was synonymous with invincibility in the cultivator world. It was an unimaginable limit. Finally, Lu Feng moved. He only lightly waved his arm, but he killed hundreds and thousands of powerhouses. In an instant, countless people rioted and flew away crazily. The 7 ancient monsters attacked at the same time, wanting to stall Lu Feng. However, the result was even more shocking. Lu Feng's eyes no longer had the timidity of the past. At this moment, he was like the emperor of heaven and earth, looking down on billions of living beings. In 100 years, I forgot the promise I made in the past. Now I have awakened. What you owe me, from now on, you will pay back. A punch streaked across the sky, creating a powerful killing intent that pierced through the sky and shattered the earth. The 7 ancient monsters of the Heaven Ascension stage were instantly killed and became a thing of the past. Another punch, unleashing the miniature of the 6 paths of reincarnation, shattering billions of dimensions. Tens of thousands of cultivators at the Imperial Sky realm were unable to resist that punch at all, and they became history as well. 2 punches ended the battle. But at this moment, Lu Feng did not stop. In the next moment, his entire body began to expand endlessly, almost becoming a 10,000 feet tall giant. He raised his hands to the sky and used a finger to break the world. A moment later, an ancient and desolate aura came from the shattered world. It was something that looked like a sky plate. Lu Feng stretched out his hand, ignoring the destructive lightning tribulation in the sky, and actually grasped the heavenly plate in his hand. In the end, he chanted an ancient incantation, and the Tian Pan emitted a space-time fluctuation. Finally, on the ground beneath Lu Feng's feet, hundreds of thousands of illusory figures slowly condensed. At this moment, Lu Feng once again unleashed an unparalleled technique, capturing the countless essences of the billions of spacetimes and sending them all towards those transparent figures. In the end, after a short while, those figures all turned into solid entities. Looking at their own appearance, countless people were in disbelief. They did not understand that their sect had been destroyed and they had died, but they were still alive and well at this moment. However, when they looked up at the sky, they understood everything. That's the reincarnation plate. Someone used a supreme power to tear apart the 6 paths of reincarnation, captured it, gathered our souls, and shaped our bodies. What kind of expert is it? Why is he helping us like this? But in the next moment they finally understood. But at the same time, these people were all dumbfounded. Because they saw the face of the giant who held the reincarnation plate. That was a very familiar face. In the past, they had ridiculed and bullied them countless times. However, he did not dare to go against them the entire time. Instead, he had a humble smile on his face the entire time. But who would have thought that this trash patriarch was such a powerhouse? In the next moment, Lu Feng in the sky moved. With a wave of his hand, he shattered countless heavenly tribulations and sent the reincarnation plate back into the 6 paths of reincarnation. He turned around and looked at his fellow disciples, and grand disciples who had bullied him countless times. Little Feng, you are right. I forgot my persistence and I lost myself in cowardice. Therefore, even though I have peerless power, I am still unable to truly break the heavens. Thank you. Then, as repayment, I will clean up everything for the sect. Lu Feng left. No one knew where he went. In the following period of time, these people finally understood what the great being who had left had done. In one night, he challenged the 3 strongest Overlord sects and 7 peak sects of the cultivation world. He killed countless powerhouses. Moreover, he had single-handedly fought against the final 5 heaven-breaking old monsters of the present age. No one knew the outcome of that battle. What they saw was the sinking of the land within a radius of 1,000,000 miles and the shattering of the sky within a radius of 10,000,000 miles. In the end, none of the 6 heaven-breaking existences appeared. And the former 10 peak sects had fallen, and could not even be considered third-rate sections. No one would have thought that an existence that had been called Trash Patriarch for 100 years would actually be so stunning. With his own strength, he created an immortal legend and created the most terrifying dark turmoil in the cultivation world. Lu Feng woke up and his footsteps never stopped. Time after time, he experienced the changes of 3 lives, and he was no longer the Lu Feng of the past. Time continued to pass, but this time, Lu Feng did not stop at all. He continued to walk, and gradually, he began to ignore that terrifying desolate aura. That was the strongest test of willpower. With one step, he crossed the 40,000-foot step, and the 4th test appeared. This time, Lu Feng walked out again. He once again began to climb endlessly 50, 000, 60,000, 70,000, 80,000. 40,000 consecutive steps, 4 consecutive environmental tests, but from beginning to end, Lu Feng did not lose himself. Now, his willpower was incomparably firm. He was confident that even if he faced that Yellow Springs steel illusion again, he would not be shaken at all. This was not an increase in strength, but a kind of firm willpower that would not waver in the face of anything. This time, Lu Fenglai arrived at the 89,999 step. Looking up, he could already see the peak of the altar. Lu Feng knew that he was not far from the end. After spending a full 100 days, he finally arrived at a place not far away. Next was the 90,000th step, and this 90,000th step was bound to produce another illusion. That should be the last illusion. The pressure in the surroundings was almost undetectable. If he had come here when he had just ascended the altar, perhaps he would have been instantly crushed by this desolate aura, and his soul would have turned into nothingness. But now, after countless refinements, Lu Feng felt that his soul had undergone an earth-shattering transformation. The divine plane that had been stimulated by the awakening of his bloodline actually expanded several times again. This, compared to the divine plane that was recorded in the Origin Sutra, was more than one level greater. If it really had to be said, perhaps even the peak of the second stage of the harmonious God realm might not necessarily have such a terrifying divine plane. Lu Feng was only happy with such a change. This was because he knew that the Origin Sutra was different from the Great Devil True Body. In addition to the cultivation method, there were also countless immortal and devil techniques. Those were all true immortal techniques and magical techniques. Their power was far from what the current martial artists' battle techniques could compare to. In order to use these immortal techniques and magical techniques, one needed not only the realm, but also the existence of the divine plane. He expelled the trace of happiness from his mind. Lu Feng looked at the stairs in front of him with a trace of a smile, and finally stepped in. Not bad. Unexpectedly, there was another change, and he entered a brand new space-time and world. This was an ancient village. Looking at his own small body, Lu Feng smiled faintly. What did I encounter this time? Starting from the 7th time, I started to be able to feel the existence of the environment. And by the 8th time, I could even stay awake many times. I don't know if this is the last time. I can always distinguish between the real world and the dream, and see the real situation clearly. Gradually, countless soldiers and horses came from afar. And it was also at this moment that Lu Feng felt as if there were countless things in his mind. He understood that his 9th life had begun in this life. He had no one to rely on, and he was a completely desolate and miserable life. But fortunately, when Lu Feng was 3 years old, he met him. He was a desolate general of the army, but he was also a prince of the previous dynasty. He used to be in charge of the world's military power, and his power was spread all over the world. He was the #1 glory under the Supremes. But who would have thought that the vast and mighty celestial empire would completely collapse with a single thought? The building collapsed, and there were mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Relying on the help of his personal guards, who risked their lives to help him, he finally escaped. But after being seriously injured, he lost his monstrous power and endless soldiers, and could only live alone. And it was in this year that he met Lu Feng. The 3-year-old Lu Feng stood alone in the wilderness, looking at the soldiers and horses whizzing by without a trace of fear. He just calmly faced everything. And it was this unique phenomenon that allowed him to see his past self. He had brought him along, taught him military tactics, and called him a peerless martial art. In this life, he placed all his hopes on Lu Feng. And Lu Feng did not disappoint him. When he was 18 years old, Lu Feng left him, taking only 3 simple attendants with him, and began the impossible path of defying the heavens. Chapter 65. Starting from the youngest soldier, Lu Feng began his own path of hegemony. In the Battle of Qinfeng Pass, he showed his talent and was promoted to the rank of a small team leader. In the Battle of Luhai Pass, he stood firm and defended his position. No one dared to attack him. Lu Feng also gained the attention of the higher-ups from this battle. From then on, he began his meteoric rise. At the age of 21, Lu Feng went crazy in the Battle of Shamaton. He killed 400 enemy soldiers and took the head of the enemy's general, shocking the entire army. This time, he finally became an officer in charge of one side. It was also from this time onwards that Lu Feng finally had his own private army. At the age of 23, in the Battle of Jialan Pass, he took the lead and wiped out 40,000 elite soldiers. He commanded 20,000 troops. At the age of 26, in the Battle of Qingsha Beach, he killed the enemy's main vanguard and was promoted to the deputy commander of the army. He had a private army of 3,000 soldiers and was known as the Tsing-Yi Army. At the age of 27, the Tsing-Yi Army was famous and intimidated both inside and outside the border. The emperor was pleased and accepted the army into the imperial court. He specially approved 20,000 soldiers. However, no one expected that the 20,000 Tsing-Yi army would become the sword that buried the imperial court. At the age of 30, Lu Feng commanded 200,000 soldiers and horses and guarded the border for 12 years. He was the true monarch of the border. At this time, the imperial court wanted to take back his military power, but they realized that everything was in vain. Lu Feng killed the imperial court's special envoy and officially rebelled. The imperial court's army attacked the border and temporarily cooperated with the foreign army in a futile attempt to kill Lu Feng. This was originally a battle without any suspense. However, who would have thought that this lack of suspense would become such a lack of suspense? Wherever the blade pointed, there would be a massacre. 20,000 Tsing-e army soldiers were unstoppable. They killed until the world was dark and time was cold. In the battle of the mountains and plains, blood stained the dusk and the earth was dyed red. 300,000 imperial soldiers were annihilated. This established the Tsing-e army's unparalleled reputation and also gave Lu Feng the embryonic form of an overlord. Repelling foreign forces from the outside and resisting the imperial army from the inside, Lu Feng began a 15-year-long period of hard work. Although it was located in a remote area, under the governance of Lu Feng, the western wasteland ushered in an unprecedented period of development. In the past 15 years, the population had increased explosively, the soldiers were strong and the horses were strong, and the provisions were abundant. On the other hand, Lu Feng was still developing and did not rashly send out troops. Finally, when he was 50 years old, he gathered 100,000 men in green and commanded 800,000 men of the West Baron army to invade the Eastern Punishment Superior nation. A sword came from the west, shaking the entire world. The heavenly empire was decaying, already on the verge of destruction, no longer able to resist this sharp green killing sword. From the west to the east, the army was like a pack of wolves and tigers. The decaying celestial empire was powerless to resist, and all the collisions were instantly reduced to ashes. In the final battle, Lu Feng gathered all the armies of the West Baron and fought a decisive battle outside the imperial capital. That battle was the most glorious battle recorded in history, and also the most terrifying battle in history. When an emperor is enraged, millions of corpses will fall. This was the roar of two emperors, a battle of life and death. The sword qi was like frost, and corpses were everywhere. More than 1 million corpses were rotting forever. The walls of the imperial capital were dyed red. Even after a few years, people could still faintly smell the stench of blood. The final sword destroyed the city, destroyed the country, and destroyed the mountains and rivers. The final battle, Jiang-e, Mountain-e, World-e. Lu Feng slowly walked up to the 81st heavenly platform, commanding the world, supreme glory and splendor. With a new ruler, the imperial capital developed vigorously, achieving the rise of the 4 seas. 10 years later, Lu Feng, who was in the last years of his life, mobilized the entire nation, gathering a total of 1,600,000 men. He set off on all 4 fronts, shocking the world, conquering the world. 3 years later, the army returned with only 200,000 dead. However, it was Lu Feng who had truly pacified the 4 seas. Since then, Lu Feng achieved a magnificent feat that no one else had ever achieved. He was the only monarch between heaven and earth, the unparalleled immortal sovereign. On the day the immortal heavenly empire was established, Lu Feng passed the throne to the first prince. Under the watchful eyes of the public, he climbed up the world altar, laughed 3 times at the top of the altar, and lit it up. With the body of the greatest emperor since ancient times, Lu Feng ignited it, turning it into the weapon of the nation, forever suppressing the endless mountains and rivers. His eyes slowly opened. This time, Lu Feng did not feel the slightest bit of difference. To him, everything that he had experienced before could no longer shake his mind. This time, I really did it. The corners of his mouth curled into an inexplicable smile. He did it, he really did it. In those endless illusions, he always maintained a clear mind, never forgetting his perseverance, never wavering in the slightest. The last illusion couldn't even shake his will in the slightest. Seeing that there was not much distance left, Lu Feng once again stepped onto the step. An endless aura of desolation engulfed this place. It was so dense that it was almost tangible. Perhaps even a god would not be able to adapt to it and continue walking. However, Lu Feng was so calm at this moment, as if he was not affected in the slightest. This didn't mean that Lu Feng had surpassed the level of a god. It was just that his willpower had reached a terrifying level. The illusions of 9 lifetimes were equivalent to Lu Feng living 9 lifetimes. And these 9 lifetimes were not ordinary experiences. He had experienced far too much during this period of time. And these 9 lifetimes had thoroughly forged his eternal and unshakable will. Lu Feng understood that as long as he set his mind to it, nothing under this starry sky would be able to shake him or make him deny himself. This was Lu Feng's terrifying transformation. The awakening of his bloodline had transformed his body. And the illusions of these 9 lifetimes had transformed his soul. Now, he had finally completed the most thorough transformation. Lu Feng believed that his future would be filled with countless miracles. In this lifetime, he would definitely be like the illusions of this last lifetime, ruling over the 9 heavens and 10 lands and suppressing the 6 directions. One step, another step. After spending an entire 100 days, Lu Fenglai arrived here. He had not given up in the past. Now that he had condensed his will, how could he give up? Although Lu Feng was trying his best to calm himself down, he could still feel his heart racing. Relying on the power of my bloodline, I did not eat or drink for 100 days. Now I feel that my limit is about to be reached. If I can't reach the end soon, I'm afraid that I will fall under my own body in the end. The bloodline could provide Lu Feng with endless power, but at the same time, the power of his bloodline that he had developed was still too little. Therefore, his body also had its limit. If it had been Lu Feng himself, not eating or drinking for 3 days would have been his limit. But now, he had endured an entire 100 days. Moreover, Lu Feng could feel that even after 10 or 20 days, he would still be fine. However, once this period of time passed, it would really be dangerous. Therefore, within this range of endurance, Lu Feng once again quickened his pace. Gradually, Lu Feng saw the top. It was a light hidden in endless haze. From here, he could not see anything at all. Lu Feng believed that even if he stood in front of it, he would definitely not be able to see anything. However, other than the hazy light of the door, Lu Feng could no longer see anything. Finally, he began to climb again. And this time, it was an entire 10 days. 10 days, Lu Feng had already reached the last moment. He could even count the number of steps left. 99, 98, 97, 32, 31, 31 step, another step. Gradually, there were fewer and fewer steps left. Lu Feng even felt that he could reach out and touch the last step. His mood could no longer be controlled. His bloodline was constantly boiling at this moment, as if it was burning everything. 9th, 8th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st, I'm here. At this moment, he was unprecedentedly excited. Lu Feng had finally done it. He had finally reached the top of this last step. In 110 days, I've crossed 99,999 steps. In this place of worship, in this ancient altar, I have finally reached the peak. In front of him, the last step was only 10 meters away from the hazy light barrier. Lu Feng was not in a hurry to enter directly. Ever since he set foot on this step, he had not stagnated at all. He had not retreated a single step. In fact, he had not even turned his head around. At this moment, when he had reached the peak, everything was over. He could finally relax. Ever since he had stepped onto the altar, Lu Feng had turned around for the first and only time. He stood at the top of the altar, looking down at the vast world of space. This place is indeed spacious. From here, I can see the condensation of the 3 divine kings' martial avatars. It is indeed unique. I didn't expect the 3 divine kings' avatars to be. At the next moment, Lu Feng's voice suddenly stopped. He looked down at the 3 divine kings' martial avatars and was completely frozen. At this moment, a trace of horror appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. He could not believe what he was seeing. Even though he had experienced so much and had an incomparably strong will, Lu Feng was still completely shocked at this moment. Below, the 3 martial avatars were still there and were still trembling. However, at this moment, Lu Feng felt completely different when he saw them from above. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood many of his previous doubts. In his mind, the ancient Feng clan was a civilization that had never produced a divine king. At their most powerful, they might have only produced a quasi-supreme existence. This could be seen from this almost perfect world. However, without a divine king, there was no divine king. They could never be compared to the divine king. Therefore, the final sacrificial ground they had constructed could not stop the divine king's expert. However, the altars constructed by such a race still possessed terrifying power even after countless years. The three divine kings' martial avatars had only been condensed for a few thousand years at most, yet they did not have the slightest power or pressure. This was really too inconceivable. Now Lu Feng finally understood. Chapter 66. Beneath his feet, ancient patterns crisscrossed around the three peerless divine kings' martial art avatars. These patterns seemed to be formed naturally. If not for standing on this terrifying altar, one would not be able to see them at all. However, Lu Feng could still vaguely make out some clues. He discovered that these patterns seemed to be pulsating with a kind of power, although it was almost imperceptible. However, Lu Feng still felt a trace of fluctuation. And it was this trace of fluctuation that could be said to be endlessly terrifying. If this kind of power erupted, even if it was just a little bit, it would probably be able to severely injure a god. The three martial art avatars did not have the slightest bit of power fluctuation. It was probably because these patterns had absorbed all of the power. Lu Feng also discovered that these patterns were not completely the same in terms of age. The patterns below the yellow spring monument that belonged to the divine king of the netherworld were obviously much more ancient, and the others were slightly more distinct. Lu Feng instantly understood everything. Could it be that these patterns were not created by someone else? Instead, they were carved by the divine king himself. Indeed, that should be the case. After all, there shouldn't be anyone in the entire universe who could imprison the martial art avatars that the divine king condensed with all his strength. Lu Feng gathered all of his power in his eyes and continued to observe. Finally, he discovered some problems again. At this time, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a trace of astonishment. In the next moment, he abruptly looked at the endless cracks behind the altar. After a long time, he took a deep breath. What remained in his eyes was an even more astonished look. So, it's actually like this. The three peerless divine kings' martial art avatars did not exist for the sake of leaving behind any traces. Their greatest purpose should be to provide power. The three divine king left behind his endless power to condense the martial art avatars just to provide unlimited power. And the ultimate purpose of this power was only one, and that was to seal. They actually worked together just to seal that terrifying crack. Lu Feng walked to the edge of the altar and stood on the peak of the altar. He looked at the crack in the distance without saying a word. He didn't know what was inside that required the three divine kings to come here in 3 eras and pour their power into it, just to seal it. What's behind the crack? According to young Master Luo, this Gufang star itself is an incomparably huge artifact, and the huge Futu pagoda that I entered is also a part of this artifact. The ancient Feng clan placed everything in this artifact. It seems that the world of that quasi-sovereign has already fused with this artifact. Then behind this crack should be Gufang's star, or perhaps it's deep within the core of this world treasure. But, is that really the case? A single artifact requires 3 divine kings to cross the river of time and space to work together in order to completely seal it? Thinking of this, Lu Feng took a deep breath of cold air. If that was really the case, then Gufang's star was probably a dangerous place. What existed in the depths was actually something that even the divine kings had to work together to seal. What on earth is in here? His expression was slightly conflicted. However, Lu Feng didn't do anything in the end. This was because he knew that he was still an endless distance away from the existence of the Divine Kings. This was something that the three great Divine Kings, whose names would be left in the history of the universe, had worked hard to seal. Now, he absolutely didn't have the qualifications to peep at it. One day, when I'm strong enough, I'll come back here again and unravel all the secrets. He clenched his fists tightly. Finally, Lu Feng turned around and walked toward the light mass in the center. He knew that it should be where his ultimate goal was, which was also where the last remnants of the ancient Feng clan were. Thinking of this, Lu Feng's heart kept beating. Although he had experienced so much, he couldn't help but feel excited when he thought that this was the final remnant of a top civilization in the universe. It was just a few simple steps, but Lu Feng seemed to have used up a lot of energy to finally reach it. When he arrived in front of the light mass, Lu Feng didn't act rashly. Instead, he quietly observed it for a long time. He didn't know if there were any unknown dangers in this final light mass, so he couldn't act rashly. Just like that, he spent an entire day looking at it. For some reason, after waking up from those 9 terrifying illusions, Lu Feng felt that he seemed to have changed a little. These changes only appeared inadvertently. This time, after a day of observation, Lu Feng once again felt this hazy feeling. He vaguely felt that this final light mass didn't seem to have any danger. There was no basis for it, but it was just that strange. In the end, Lu Feng gritted his teeth. No matter what, I've already come here. I absolutely can't give up like this. It doesn't matter if I'm reckless or crazy. I've already decided, so I can't back down. It's not a good idea to go on like this. There's a good saying, how can you catch a tiger cub without entering the tiger's den? In that case, I'll believe in my feelings and take a gamble. Finally, Lu Feng didn't hesitate any longer and directly stepped into the room. At this moment, Lu Feng saw everything around him change. His expression changed slightly. However, he wasn't too shocked. After experiencing 9 transformations, he was no longer frightened by such sudden transformations. Could it be that this last time is still a test of illusion? In that case, as long as I stick to my will, I can get out of here. Finally, as Lu Feng's thoughts came to an end, the endless darkness began to change. The next moment, Lu Feng felt that he was gradually changing. You've lost your way. Have you found the path to the future? In the unseen world, a voice sounded, passing through the world and through reincarnation. He stood quietly between heaven and earth, unable to find the path when he came, unable to see the light of the past. He used to look down on heaven and earth, looking down on the common people with disdain. With a punch, he could destroy time. But now, he couldn't even see his own path clearly. Sorrow, this was the greatest desolation. The next moment, he raised his head. His gaze was distant, piercing through time and space, seeing through the unknown haze. However, there was still confusion in his great eyes. Road, is there still a road? I'm dead, I've lost. Is there still a road in the future? I've held up the backbone for heaven and earth, but who can continue the light for me and illuminate the road? He lowered his head and looked at his chest. His entire body was dyed red, and he trembled slightly. In the illusion, a clear voice echoed again, making him tremble. There was a path in the first place, but you have already abandoned it, leave. We've lost an era, but there's still the next era. I hope that one day you can find your own path. Find the final path that belongs to us. Heaven and earth shattered, time shattered, everything was completely annihilated. Everything no longer existed. All that was left was that lonely back, that deep door that opened with a bang. Lu Feng stood in place in a daze. He didn't see the heaven-piercing futu that appeared behind him again. He didn't see the extremely dazzling brilliance on his body. He just stared blankly in front of him. It was as if there really was a deep door in front of him. Finally, there was a slight fluctuation in Lu Feng's eyes. And it was at this moment that the terrifying heaven-piercing futu disappeared. The dazzling runes were hidden. Lu Feng raised his hand and stared blankly at himself. There was a strange sadness and confusion in his eyes. Who am I? I once looked down on millions of creatures. Was I at the peak of the endless? But why, I don't know anything, I don't remember anything. Road, there is still a road. The road, hasn't it already collapsed? Wasn't there already no path left for them? Can I still go on? Sadness colored everything around him. When it was hazy, it was as if the whole time and space were silent in a kind of sadness. The next moment Lu Feng raised his head. He couldn't see anything in his eyes. There was only a kind of determination. A kind of endless madness and determination. No, there is still. Everything is not over. One day, I will burn my blood again and break through all the shackles again. One day, I will go back, gradually. All the expressions in his eyes disappeared. Lu Feng stood in the endless light and seemed to have recovered his previous appearance. The corners of his mouth were a kind of bitter smile. It was indeed the final terrifying illusion. I was almost lost. But fortunately, I still walked out in the end. Now everything is over. Vaguely, Lu Feng felt that the last illusion was too strange. It was completely different from the previous 9 times. There was no beginning or end. It was so indescribable and unbearable that it appeared so suddenly that he didn't even have time to react. Moreover, the last illusion actually gave him a kind of feeling that it was completely real. However, in the end, Lu Feng gently shook his head. At this moment, in his heart, he was only determined. He was certain that it was an illusion. Next, it's time for the real harvest. The last remnant of the ancient Fang clan can finally be presented in front of me. In front of Lu Feng was a palace-like existence. It couldn't be considered very tall, but it gave Lu Feng a feeling of endless luxury. Lu Feng understood that the last remnant of the ancient Fang clan was inside. His footsteps kept quickening. In just a few steps, Lu Feng had already arrived in front of the palace. In Lu Feng's impression, this kind of palace really couldn't be considered tall. At the very least, in the city he lived in, there were innumerable buildings that were bigger than this. However, those buildings were far from comparable to the one in front of him. It wasn't because of the size or appearance, but a kind of feeling of vicissitudes. Chapter 67. This was a kind of historical precipitation, a kind of condensation of civilization, which was incomparable to anything else. Finally, Lu Fenglai arrived in front of the palace. The entire palace had no main entrance. From the outside, one could only see endless darkness, as if there was some kind of ferocious beast that devoured living things hidden inside. However, Lu Feng did not hesitate at all, because that feeling still existed. He could clearly feel that there was no danger inside. At such a time, Lu Feng had no other choice but to believe in his own feelings. Gradually, Lu Feng's figure disappeared into the endless darkness. What is this thing? From the outside, this palace at the peak of the altar was not that big, but after really walking in, Lu Feng realized how shallow he was. Since this sacrificial space could use a quasi-supreme's almost perfect world as the final place, then how could this peak of the altar be so simple? There was indeed a space inside, but compared to the outside it was obviously much smaller. This was not a world, but a space opened up by a super-expert with his own magical ability. Legend had it that if it was the Divine King, he could even open up a planet with life with a wave of his hand. Of course, this was just a legend. Now, Lu Feng had entered such a space. Although it wasn't very big, Lu Feng understood that it must have been opened up by a super-expert. It was even very likely that it was opened up by the fallen quasi-supreme expert. Not for anything else, but because this space was incomparably solid. Walking on the road, Lu Feng saw countless things. They were all strange and different. However, these things had a common characteristic, which was that they were full of innumerable agility. Gradually, Lu Feng walked further and further away. Finally, he stopped. His eyes suddenly flashed with a kind of excited brilliance. Legend has it that the ancient square civilization is most famous not for how powerful they are, but for the crystallization of their civilization. The real essence of their civilization is elixirs. Among the civilizations that were discovered in the ancient square star that were useful to mankind, there were refining techniques and refining elixirs. However, among these things, the most precious thing was the art of alchemy. Compared to the art of alchemy and those ancient medicinal pills, the so-called tools were nothing at all. Lu Feng had also discovered this through the Sky Network. Only then did he know that the true crystallization of the ancient civilization was medicinal pills. In the Federation, the existence of pills had almost become peerless. The medicines that could be sold in the Federation were generally beginner and intermediate level medicines. If one wanted high-grade potions, they would have to join a powerful force to obtain them. As for the legendary level and above, perhaps only the core disciples of the major families were qualified to use them after they had achieved great results or shown great potential. As for the most terrifying mythological potion, it was an extremely terrifying existence. Any family would treat such an item as a treasure. It had not appeared in the eyes of ordinary people in the Federation for hundreds of years. Among the potions there were 4 different grades: normal, rare, supreme, and perfect. The biggest reason for such a division was that it was based on the quality of the medicinal pills. In other words, medicinal pills were also divided in such a way. The only difference was that there were only 2 grades of quality in medicinal pills, which were defective and perfect medicinal pills. A defective quality medicinal pill was equivalent to a top quality medicinal pill. Moreover, its effect was often several times better than medicinal pills. The high-grade and above medicinal pills in the hands of the Federation government and the major families were almost all found in ancient ruins. According to the legends, when Gufang's star was first discovered, the Federation had obtained countless precious medicinal pills from there. There were even legendary medicinal pills in the legends. Of course, legends were legends. No one could believe them. In the past, Lu Feng had only listened to them. However, it was different now, because he knew that the legends were true. Most likely, the countless pills were really found in Gufang's star. Because at this moment, the strange things around him seemed to be medicinal pills. There are actually so many medicinal pills. This is so terrifying. In the Federation, a high-grade defective medicinal pill was almost a priceless treasure. It couldn't be bought without hundreds of millions or even billions. As for perfect-grade pills, they were almost priceless treasures. Basically, such medicinal pills were tens or even hundreds of times more expensive than defective medicinal pills. However, now, all the medicinal pills in front of Lu Feng were definitely medicinal pills. In terms of quantity, it was almost countless. These medicinal pills should be low-grade and mid-grade. I can feel that the power contained in them isn't very strong. However, even so, this is already terrifying enough. I'm afraid that if I were to sell them, the wealth obtained would definitely not be less than any first-rate family. Of course, Lu Feng was just thinking about it. After all, medicinal pills weren't medicinal pills. Once obtained, who would take them out to auction? Thinking of the value of these medicinal pills, Lu Feng originally intended to buy them directly. However, he stopped the next moment, because Lu Feng finally understood 2 things. The first thing was that there were too many medicinal pills in front of him. Too many, it was too many. He was only one person. How could he bring such a huge amount of medicinal pills out? Even if he were to take them freely, he would probably be able to take a few hundred at most. The second thing was the grade of the medicinal pills here. He still remembered the legend that the Federation government had obtained high-grade and above medicinal pills from Gufang's star. One had to know that even a legendary medicinal pill would cost tens of billions. If the price of medicinal pills were to be measured in terms of money, one wouldn't be qualified to compete at all without trillions. In front of him, even if he were to take away thousands of such medicinal pills, the value would probably not be as good as a defective legendary medicinal pill. Moreover, Lu Feng had just walked a short distance. There would definitely be medicinal pills of higher grades behind. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't rashly collect them. He chose to continue moving forward. Along the way, Lu Feng's heart was surging with excitement and his blood was boiling. Because Lu Feng felt that he seemed to have walked into a kingdom of medicinal pills, a world completely composed of medicinal pills. I don't know if the number of low-grade medicinal pills discovered in the Federation's history is as many as here. There were simply too many medicinal pills here. As he went deeper, almost all he could see were medicinal pills, and the grades were constantly increasing. Towards the end, Lu Feng realized that the number of high-grade medicinal pills had already reached tens of thousands, and he was far from reaching the end. Time passed slowly. As he saw more and more medicinal pills, Lu Feng gradually began to feel numb. After all, after looking at so many medicinal pills for so long, he was no longer excited. Finally, vaguely, Lu Feng finally reached the end. In front of him, there was no longer a sea of medicinal pills. Instead, there was a simple and unadorned hall. It was a hall within a hall. That was a hall within a hall. Seeing the hall within the hall, Lu Feng stopped in his tracks. A trace of excitement appeared in his calm eyes again. He knew that he had finally reached the end. This should be the place where the essence of the altar was gathered. This should be the place where the essence of the entire ancient Fang clan's civilization was gathered. Lu Feng quickened his pace. Without the slightest hesitation, he even forgot about the existence of danger and directly stepped into the hall within the hall. Looking at everything in front of him, Lu Feng took a deep breath. His heart began to beat violently. Because Lu Feng finally saw the place where the last remnants of the ancient Fang clan were. The hall within the hall did not use any space to open it up. Just like how it looked from the outside, it was only tens of thousands of square meters in size. The things inside were not as numerous as the things outside. But even so, Lu Feng could not calm down. Because he knew that any one of the things inside would be comparable to the value of thousands or even tens of thousands of medicinal pills outside. These medicinal pills are definitely beyond the high-grade level. Could it be? Could it be that all the medicinal pills on these stone platforms are at the legendary level? In front of him were thousands of small stone platforms. On each stone platform, there was a medicinal pill of different shapes lying quietly on it. From above, Lu Feng felt a strong fluctuation of power. These were far from what the medicinal pills outside could compare to. Even the high-grade medicinal pills could not be compared to them. In addition to these thousands of small stone platforms, there were 10 huge stone platforms in the center. On top of them, there were 10 medicinal pills lying quietly. In addition to these, there were also 3 similar stone platforms in the most central area. Lu Feng looked at the 10 stone platforms, his heart beating violently at this moment. There are thousands of legendary medicinal pills outside. But the stone platform in the center is obviously different from the others. Then, those 10 medicinal pills could be mythical level. There were actually mythical medicinal pills here. Thinking of this possibility, Lu Feng's heart beat to the limit. Although he did not know the specific effects of mythical medicinal pills, this did not prevent him from knowing the existence of mythical medicinal pills. According to legend, mythical medicinal pills were called mythical because they had godlike effects. Medicinal pills were divided into cultivation type and auxiliary type. Once a cultivation type mythical medicinal pill was taken, It could almost make an ordinary person with no talent become a warrior at the peak of the perfect stage. Of course, unless it was a perfect-grade mythical medicinal pill, the user's limit would be this after taking it. But even so, mythical medicinal pills were something that countless people went crazy for. After all, a warrior at the peak of the perfect stage was the pinnacle of the realm below the gods. Chapter 68. The effects of auxiliary mythical potions were even more heaven-defying and terrifying. For a god, ordinary potions had no effect at all. Even if it was a legendary potion, the effect of the enhancement was limited. But mythical potions were different. They could even provide the most perfect enhancement and help to any god below the divine king. And this was only a mythical potion. And elixirs were even more priceless. Legend had it that the peerless overlord of mankind 5,000 years ago, the divine king of chaos, had taken a mythical elixir of perfect quality. At that time, his aptitude was not the most outstanding. In that era, there were many people who were more powerful than him. And so, he was able to walk out of the billions of lowly creatures and finally ascend to the position of the divine king by relying on that mythical elixir of perfect quality. And now, in front of Lu Feng, there might be 10 mythical elixirs. Finally, Lu Feng came closer. He stood in front of the 10 large stone platforms and looked at the peaceful existence on them, but his expression was full of doubt. No, no! If the ancient Feng clan really has mythical elixirs, then how could they not produce the divine king? Even a defective mythical elixir is equivalent to a top-grade mythical potion. Maybe 1 elixir was not enough, but if he took 2, 3, or even 5 or 10 elixirs, then that quasi-sovereign should have broken through. But the final result was that quasi-sovereign died, and here, there are only these 10 elixirs. Could it be that I was wrong? Lu Feng looked at the 10 luxurious elixirs with a solemn expression. Finally, he gradually discovered the truth. At this time, disappointment flashed in Lu Feng's eyes. Sure enough, I guessed right. He did not know what mythical elixirs looked like. But since they were elixirs that surpassed the legendary level, then they must have been completely changed. Although the elixirs in front of him were much more terrifying than the thousands of elixirs around him, Lu Feng still felt the same. It was just that the density of the power was obviously much higher, but in terms of level, there was no change. Countless runes flickered, and a peculiar aura was faintly spreading. However, these auras and runes were only countless times denser. They had never reached the level of qualitative change. These shouldn't be the real mythical pills, right? However, they seem to be on the verge of transformation. It should only be a little bit away from becoming a mythical creature. What a pity, what a pity! These pills must have been quasi-deified pills. Thinking of this, Lu Feng showed a slightly disappointed expression. However, this expression quickly disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a strange smile. If it was me in the past, I would be incomparably excited at the sight of the best quality high-grade potions. But if it's a pill, I'm afraid that even if I sold all of my family's assets, I still wouldn't be able to afford one. Now that he was able to see a quasi-deified pill, it was already very good. Now, I'm disappointed because they aren't mythical. This is a bit too ungrateful. After a self-deprecating laugh, Lu Feng looked at the 3 stone platforms in the center. Rather than calling them stone platforms, it was better to call them 3 sparkling light pillars. Although it looked like a stone, no matter how he looked at it, it looked like a sparkling crystal. After a while, Lu Feng finally remembered. His eyes were filled with shock as he looked at the 3 stone platforms. Could it be that this is a fantasy crystal? After taking a closer look, Lu Feng finally came to a conclusion. This was the fantasy crystal that he knew of. The whole thing is made of fantasy crystal. What a terrifying amount of money! Fantasy crystal was a specialty of a galaxy at the edge of the universe. Legend had it that fantasy crystal did not have any magical effect. However, its value was extremely terrifying. This was because the fantasy crystal only had one characteristic, and that was its hardness. It was extremely hard. Of course, this was also related to the origin of the fantasy crystal. The formation process of the fantasy crystal was very terrifying. It was formed after the fusion of the planets in the galaxy and was infinitely compressed. After a planet that was almost the size of a third-level life planet was compressed, it could only form a fist-sized fantasy crystal. However, this fantasy crystal was a bit strange. This was because a crystal formed by the compression of such a huge planet should be extremely heavy. However, this fantasy crystal was different. It could be said that it was the exact opposite. It was almost weightless. Of course, the fantasy crystal could only be formed by the planets in that galaxy. As for the reason, it had always been a secret. Humans had tried countless times to unravel the reason, but they had never been able to do it. This was because that galaxy was the territory of another Overlord race in the universe. Coincidentally, that race did not get along well with humans. The hardness of the fantasy crystal was well known throughout the universe. There were once human researchers who did experiments on it. They used the main cannon of an advanced warship to bombard it, but it was unable to shatter this crystal that seemed like it could be shattered with one punch. In the universe, there were many races that chose to use magic crystals as their weapons. As long as an inscription master engraved some terrifying lines on the magic crystal weapon would be indestructible and indestructible. I didn't expect this. The ancient Fong clan was actually so terrifying. The number of fantasy crystals used to make these 3 stone platforms is definitely an astronomical figure. I'm afraid that to obtain so many fantasy crystals, it would take at least the compression of a star. Finally, Lu Feng stopped paying attention to the 3 fantasy crystals that were made into stone platforms. After all, no matter how precious the fantasy crystals were, they were only used to carry things. The truly precious things should be the things on the stone platforms. Lu Fenglai went to the side of the first fantasy crystal stone platform and quietly looked at the things on the stone platform. On the first fantasy crystal stone platform, there was something that Lu Feng was familiar with but also unfamiliar with. Because what existed above it was an infinitely dark star elixir? Is this an elixir? But, is there really such an elixir? The elixir in front of him was incomparably black. It didn't even have a specific shape. After looking at it for a while, Lu Feng quickly shifted his gaze because he discovered a frightening phenomenon. When he focused on the black elixir, he actually felt that his soul was about to leave his body and be devoured. It was as if the black thing wasn't an elixir at all, but an infinitely small black hole. What a strange thing. Could it really be an elixir? From it, I can feel the aura of an elixir. But how can there be such an elixir in this world? Shaking his head with a bitter smile, Lu Feng looked at the thing on the second fantasy crystal stone platform. This time, Lu Feng recognized what it was at a glance. Crystal stone? Crystal stone, it was a crystal stone. The thing on the second fantasy crystal stone platform was a piece of crystal stone. Lu Feng walked closer and began to observe it carefully. Unfortunately, after looking at it for a long time, he still couldn't figure out what the crystal stone was. In the end, Lu Feng looked at the last fantasy crystal stone platform helplessly. Lu Feng couldn't recognize the thing on it at all. What is this thing? Why are there so many strange things here? Looking at the thing on the third stone platform, Lu Feng really didn't know what to say. At least he could understand the first 2, but for the third, Lu Feng really couldn't understand. Because the thing on the third stone platform was actually something like an iron plate. He couldn't see the material of the iron plate. As for what it was used for, Lu Feng didn't know at all. Lu Feng pondered for a while, but still couldn't figure out what the iron plate was used for. He also knew that he couldn't figure it out at all. So, Lu Feng simply stopped thinking about it. Standing in front of the 3 fantasy crystal stone platforms, Lu Feng was silent. Because at this moment, he didn't know whether he should take these things or not. The black thing on the first fantasy crystal stone platform is very strange. Just by looking at it, I can feel my soul trembling. That thing is too evil. Even if it's a really good thing, it's not something I can have right now. So, I won't touch the thing on the first fantasy crystal stone platform for now. When I'm strong enough, I'll come here to take it. But the things above the second and third shouldn't be dangerous. So, I'll take them first. Lu Feng knew that the ancient Fang clan wouldn't put trash in the most precious place. These 3 things were definitely incomparably precious. So, even if he didn't know what they were used for, Lu Feng still planned to take them first. Walking to the side of the crystal stone, Lu Feng stretched out his arm, wanting to directly take it, but in the next moment, he stopped. He frowned slightly. There shouldn't be any protective measures here, right? From the moment he came in until now, Lu Feng hadn't taken anything. Even the high-grade pills outside, he only saw them, but he didn't take any of them. So, until now, Lu Feng didn't know if these things were really as harmless as they seemed and could be easily taken. He thought for a moment. Lu Feng thought of a way. He directly took off his shirt and held it in his hand. Slowly, Lu Feng twisted his shirt into the shape of a stick and slowly stretched it toward the stone platform. Finally, under Lu Feng's nervous gaze, his shirt touched the crystal stone. After waiting for a long time, no strange phenomenon appeared. At this moment, Lu Feng finally relaxed. He let out a long sigh of relief, and then carefully stretched out his hand. Finally, the moment he touched the crystal stone, Lu Feng quickly retracted his arm. Phew, looks like there's no danger. On his face, there was an incomparably happy smile. But in the next moment, Lu Feng's smile suddenly froze. What's going on? Chapter 69. There was no fear in his voice, but it was full of anxiety. Because at this moment, after Lu Feng obtained the crystal, the surrounding stone platforms suddenly underwent a huge change. A luxurious light suddenly appeared. There was no trace to search for, no starting point to inquire about. It was born just like that. In Lu Feng's eyes, it instantly enveloped all the stone platforms. After a moment, in the entire hall, except for the crystal in Lu Feng's hand, all the stone platforms had been enveloped in that luxurious light. Seeing this scene, the corners of Lu Feng's eyes twitched slightly. The next moment, he gently touched the stone platforms with the clothes in his hand again. And to do so, he had to pass through those lights. But the moment he touched those lights, Lu Feng showed a shocked expression. Because right in front of his eyes, the clothes from before had disappeared just like that. No, it didn't disappear, it was destroyed. Not even a trace was left behind. It was completely annihilated. This, Lu Feng opened his mouth slightly, but he couldn't say anything. The moment the clothes touched the light, although it was brief, Lu Feng still felt it. What kind of terrifying power was that? It was completely indescribable, terrifying destruction. He had a feeling that even if he had just put in some abnormally hard material, the result would have been the same. His eyes were full of unwillingness. Lu Feng finally shook his head gently, turned around, and left. Now that he had awakened his bloodline, he felt that he had completed a transformation. But even so, he was still only a mid-level warrior. Facing this last remnant of a civilization, he had no way to deal with it. Rather than waiting here, it was better to leave here and wait until he had cultivated to a sufficient level before returning. Lu Feng wasn't a hesitant person, so after making up his mind, he left here without any hesitation. Walking out of the hall, Lu Feng looked at everything around him and sighed slightly. because he found that the elixirs outside weren't enveloped by those lights. In other words, these elixirs could still be collected. Although compared to the elixirs in the hall, their value is 1,000,000 times lower. But it's better than nothing. He only had a crystal that he didn't know what it was used for. Although the fact that it was stored in the Great Hall so carefully proved its value, no matter how precious it was useless to Lu Feng before he knew what it was used for. In terms of preciousness, Lu Feng believed that there was nothing more precious than the Tongtian Futu in his mind space. Therefore, what he most urgently wanted now was to improve his cultivation. A few months ago, in the battle in front of Futa's pagoda, he had already seen the terror of those Federation geniuses. All of these existences were martial artists above the upheaval period. Moreover, any one of them would definitely have the terrifying strength to challenge those who were one level higher than them. Like that young Master Luo, in the realm of a warrior's realm. Although that was just a little power of a god. But a god was a god. In the realm of a god's power of a god. When a god made a move, even if it was only 1 star of power, that terrifying power was lower than a warrior's power of tens of thousands of stars after amplification. This was the power of a god, this was the terror of a god's power. Therefore, even if a warrior was at the peak, he was still a human. There was an insurmountable gap between them and a god. The gap between such existences was too big. But young Master Luo was able to do this, undoubtedly proving his terrifying reputation as one of the 7 kings of the younger generation. Compared to them, Lu Feng was too far behind. If it wasn't for the awakening of his bloodline, Lu Feng wouldn't even have the confidence to defeat any of them in the future when facing someone of the same level. Therefore, what he needed most now was to improve his strength. They are only a few years older than me, but the gap between their strength and mine is like heaven and earth. I'm not just a little behind them. I was already far behind them in terms of starting out, and the resources I can get for future cultivation can't be compared to theirs. If I don't work hard, I'm afraid I'll have to look up to them for the rest of my life. Looking at the thousands of pills, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a trace of determination. He knew that if he wanted to become stronger, these pills were indispensable. However, now Lu Feng was in a dilemma. He didn't have any containers on him, and the number of pills he could take away was limited. Lu Feng calculated a little. Even if he gave it his all, he could only take away 300 pills at most. He really couldn't take any more. But even with these 300 pills, Lu Feng was in a dilemma. Or in other people's eyes, he naturally had to pick the most precious ones to take away. The 300 pills he took away should all be high-grade pills. After all, the value of a high-grade pill was dozens or even hundreds of times more than a mid-grade pill. But Lu Feng didn't think so, because as far as he was concerned now, high-grade pills couldn't be used casually. Pills were different from potions. Their effects were too heaven-defying and terrifying. If he forcefully took them, he was afraid it would hurt his body. And this was what Lu Feng didn't want to encounter. If that happened, the loss would outweigh the gain. Once he took away all the high-grade pills, there would be a period of stagnation in his cultivation before he could bear the effects of the high-grade pills. And this period of time wouldn't be short. Even if I can take high-grade pills to increase my cultivation, the number of pills I take won't be too much. Instead of wasting time chasing value, it's better to choose the ones that are most suitable for me. The majority of the medicinal pills here were of perfect quality. The quality was equivalent to perfect quality medicine, and the effects were probably several times higher. So Lu Feng wouldn't take them like before to become a beginner psychic. Maybe he only needed a few pills to break through the shackles of his cultivation and enter the next level. So, since he had already decided, Lu Feng didn't hesitate anymore. Finally, Lu Feng began to choose the pills that were suitable for him. He was actually very selective in his selection. Of course, the more pills that could increase his cultivation, the better, but there was also a bottom line. Finally, when Lu Feng finished his selection, 300 pills were quietly placed in front of Lu Feng. Among the pills that Lu Feng chose, there were spiritual pills that could increase mental strength, and martial pills that could be used for physical martial arts cultivation. It was actually very easy to distinguish between the two. Those that were shining with sparkling runes were spiritual pills, and those that were shining with a tyrannical aura and surging like blood were martial pills. Those that were constantly changing colors were medicinal pills. The existence of medicinal pills, the greatest function was to be used as a support. So, medicinal pills were also called auxiliary pills. Among the pills that Lu Feng chose, there were nearly 290 cultivation pills. And among these 290 pills, more than 70% were used for psychic cultivation, and only 30% were used for warriors. In fact, this was also Lu Feng's choice. He knew that his path as a warrior didn't actually need many pills. After all, with the existence of his bloodline and the horror of the great devil true body, he could almost get rid of his dependence on medicinal pills. If it wasn't for the simultaneous improvement of psychic cultivation and warrior cultivation, he was afraid that he would have chosen all the pills that cultivated mental strength. In the end, Lu Feng only took out less than 30 medicinal pills to be used as support. These pills were for Lu Feng to use when breaking through or in times of danger. After all, these things weren't good things, and there would definitely be repercussions after using them. If he could avoid using them, Lu Feng would definitely try his best not to use them. Therefore, he didn't choose too many. Looking at the pills in front of him, Lu Feng temporarily forgot all the previous regrets. At this moment, there was only a kind of joy and a burning fighting spirit in his eyes. I've been here for a full 4 months. It's also time to leave here and go to school. This time, leaving will be the time for me, Lu Feng, to shine. One day, I'll make this era belong to me. It was extremely difficult to ascend the ancient altar, and it took him nearly 4 months. However, it only took him an hour to return. From the peak of the altar, Lu Feng quickly rushed down and followed the path he came from, finally returning to the sealed entrance. Looking at the time on the heavenly network, Lu Feng nodded slightly. It was now exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. There shouldn't be anyone here at this time. Therefore, Lu Feng dared to go out without worry. Looking at the sparkling light screen, Lu Feng gritted his teeth and passed through it in the end. It seems that my intuition was not wrong. When I came in, there was a slim chance of survival, but when I left, there was no danger at all. Standing outside the wall, Lu Feng's body was filled with all kinds of ammunition, and there was a kind of joy on his face. When he came out, Lu Feng only felt that the world had changed for a moment, and then he returned to the place he had entered before. Just as he had thought, there was indeed no one around. Without any hesitation, Lu Feng quickly ran out of the room. I believe that the ancient Feng clan's sacrificial ground definitely has more than these low-level pills. I just don't know what he obtained from here. Above the boundless void, 2 figures looked at Lu Feng's departure in silence. One of them spoke and looked at the illusion beside him. The illusion shook his head gently. He said slowly, I don't know what he obtained either. However, even if he obtains some amazing treasure, so what? The current Xiao Feng is still too weak. Given his character, he definitely won't tell anyone. Perhaps one day in the future, when he is strong enough, he will say it. Chapter 70. There was a strange emotion in his voice. However, the person beside him could clearly sense the happiness and pride in his voice. Eventually, a helpless expression appeared on his face. Whatever he obtains, won't the Lu family benefit in the end? I really don't know what secret this kid has to actually be able to enter the ancient Feng tribe's sacrificial ground. Back then, we all discovered the real entrance to this place. Unfortunately, none of us were able to enter. The seal inside is really too terrifying. Against the projection of the divine king of the Yellow Springs, we were simply no match for him. If it weren't for the people outside helping us, I'm afraid we would have all died. After saying this, the entity sighed deeply. At this moment, both of them were incomparably silent. In the end, the illusion spoke. No matter what, I have to protect Xiaofeng this time. I'm no longer the same person I was in the past. Back then, because of those old bastards, I fell at the last step and temporarily lost the qualifications to challenge the Divine King. This time, no matter what, I won't let him repeat my tragedy. After saying this, the figure started to fade away and eventually disappeared into the sky. After an hour, Lu Feng finally arrived at the place where he had stored the hover car. After taking a look around and confirming that there was really no one around, Lu Feng quickly walked into the hover car. After putting away all the elixirs, he started to speed towards ancient Fang City. After speeding for an hour, he finally arrived at the hotel he had left at. As he looked at the bustling city, he felt that this city was filled with a modern vibe. Lu Feng felt as if a lifetime had passed. Perhaps he had only been gone for 4 months, but on the path to the altar, Lu Feng had experienced 9 lifetimes. Although they had only been illusions, the experiences of these 9 lifetimes felt like the most realistic experiences. Currently, he felt a kind of vicissitudes and a kind of desolation in his heart. Now that he saw the prosperity of this era that truly belonged to him, all sorts of feelings welled up in Lu Feng's heart. I'm finally back. He got off the hover car and walked straight into the hotel. Lu Feng didn't know if his things were still there. Even if the hotel disposed of his things, Lu Feng had nothing to say. After all, he had only spent a week's deposit. Now that 4 months had passed, all the expenses were naturally gone. And it was reasonable for the hotel to want to do something. Lu Feng walked into the hall and went directly to the counter. Miss, I left for a period of time because of some matters. At that time, I only booked a room for a week, but now it's been more than 3 months. Do you still have the luggage I left in your room? Hearing Lu Feng's words, the receptionist gave Lu Feng a strange look. After all, she rarely encountered such a situation. But after a while, the waiter recovered. She turned on the recording device that she carried with her and checked it a little, then asked, "Excuse me, are you Mr. Lu Feng?" Lu Feng nodded gently. The waiter smiled. She said, "We rarely encounter a situation like yours, but our hotel's reputation is still very good. Although you've already left, we've kept your belongings." Lu Feng was slightly happy. To be honest, there was nothing valuable in his luggage. But it was very important, because there were many pieces of identification about him in it. Those were the ultimate identification that Tian Luo could not replace. After he returned to the Cymbidium, he had to report to school immediately. If he lost it, it would take some time to get it back. Lu Feng didn't like to encounter such a situation. In that case, thank you very much. Where is my luggage? Seeing Lu Feng's happy look, the waiter smiled politely. But she didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "However, Mr. Lu Feng, although there is no extra charge for keeping your luggage, can you pay for other things directly?" Other things? Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. He didn't know what the waiter was talking about. But soon, he finally remembered. His expression was a little awkward. "I forgot just now. Sorry. Then how much is my rental fee?" In addition to staying in this hotel, Lu Feng also rented a hover car from the hotel, which was the one he was riding now. And the rental fee was 500 Federation dollars a day. Until now, he had rented it for nearly 4 months. In total, the rental fee was as high as 60,000 Federation dollars. "Sir, you have rented it for a total of 114 days. The rental fee is 57,000 Federation dollars. You have already paid 100,000 Federation dollars as a deposit. If we deduct it, we will need to give you 43,000 Federation dollars. In this case, do you have anything else to explain? Lu Feng shook his head. 60,000 Federation dollars was nothing to him. After all, he still had millions of Federation dollars. In addition, Lu Feng didn't care much about money. And now, after getting those pills, he didn't care about money anymore. So, Lu Feng didn't have anything to doubt. The waiter took Lu Feng's payment card, swiped 43,000 Federation dollars on it, and returned it to Lu Feng. Sir, your luggage is in our hotel's vault. I will ask someone to get it for you in a while. After saying this, the waiter turned on the Sky Network's communication device. After giving some instructions, he didn't say anything else. Soon, a person walked over with Lu Feng's luggage. Seeing the luggage, Lu Feng nodded lightly. That was indeed his stuff. Then, thank you very much. I will exchange the hover car with you later. The last sentence was added by Lu Feng when he was about to leave, because at this moment, he suddenly remembered that there were still more than 300 pills on the hover car. It's okay, sir, according to the amount you paid. Before 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, the right to use the hover car still belongs to you. He smiled and explained to Lu Feng. And Lu Feng also smiled politely, turned around and left. He walked to the hover car and placed his luggage on it. Soon, Lu Feng took out all the useless things from his luggage, and then carefully placed the 300 pills inside. After everything was done, Lu Feng let out a long sigh of relief. Looking at the time displayed on the Sky Network, Lu Feng thought for a while, then returned to the hotel and booked a suite. After entering the room, Lu Feng placed the luggage next to his bed, and opened the Sky Network. In an instant, hundreds of messages swarmed in. Seeing this, Lu Feng didn't show any surprise. After all, he could be considered to have disappeared for 4 months. There should be a lot of people looking for him. Among the hundreds of messages, more than 70 were sent by Li Yongheng. The content of the messages was naturally about Lu Feng's whereabouts. Lu Feng smiled faintly when he saw the deep concern on her face. To be honest, having a brother like this, Lu Feng felt happy from the bottom of his heart. Lu Feng casually replied to Li Yongheng's message, then continued to look at the following messages. The rest of the messages were from some of his classmates asking him out to play. Of course, other than these, there was also the admission notice from the Federal University. However, the one that caught Lu Feng's attention the most was the message from his father. It said that Lu Tao's research had reached a critical point, and he might not be able to return home in the near future. Lu Feng didn't have to worry, and he would return at the end of the year. And looking at the time, Lu Feng realized that the day the message was sent was the day he entered the ancient ritual grounds. After a moment of silence, Lu Feng didn't think too much about it. He had already guessed the origin of his bloodline. Although it was somewhat inconceivable, Lu Feng understood that all of this was really the case. Since his father had something to do, waiting for a while was no big deal. Just as Lu Feng was about to close the Sky Network and have a good rest, Li Yongheng's call request suddenly popped up. With a faint smile, Lu Feng picked up the call. I say, Lu Feng, where did you go? Why haven't I heard from you in such a long time? You didn't even report for school. What else do you want to do? I was planning to ask my mother to use her connections to arrange for us to stay in the same dorm. Now that you've messed up, there's no chance. As soon as the call connected, Li Yongheng began to nag non-stop. Lu Feng only smiled and listened, but didn't say anything. When Li Yongheng stopped, Lu Feng was finally able to speak. Yongheng, this is my fault. Actually, I didn't expect this to happen. Originally, I only planned to travel for a while, but I happened to run into some things, so it was delayed. When Li Yongheng heard Lu Feng's words, he was silent for a while. Some things? What was it? What could have caused Lu Feng to disappear for 4 whole months? But now that he saw Lu Feng's peaceful appearance, he was relieved. Furthermore, from Lu Feng's words, he could tell that Lu Feng's intentions were clear. Lu Feng didn't seem to want to say much about this trip. As a brother, Lu Feng naturally didn't want to say much, so he didn't ask anymore. Finally, after chatting for a while about the Federal University's Cymbidium branch, the two ended the call. Lu Feng laid on the bed and quickly fell asleep. The next day, when he woke up, it was already close to noon. Lu Feng went to the front desk of the hotel to check out and ate a big meal. If it weren't for the support of the bloodline power, he would have starved to death. But even so, Lu Feng already felt that his limit was approaching. He urgently needed to replenish himself. Unknowingly, before Lu Feng left the hotel, he shocked the hotel staff again. Because this time, Lu Feng ate too much. This was almost equivalent to the maximum appetite of 7 or 8 adults. Even so, Lu Feng didn't show any signs of discomfort after eating. Chapter 71. Under the shocked gazes of the waiters, Lu Feng awkwardly paid the bill and hurriedly left. Everything went smoothly when he left. Lu Feng dragged the huge box and boarded the interstellar flight back to the Cymbidium. Lying on the seat, Lu Feng calmed down a little. From now on, it would take at least 5 days to return to the Cymbidium. These 5 days were enough for Lu Feng to sort out everything. I have to say that coming here this time was really the right decision. Who would have thought that I would be able to obtain so much? Such a huge harvest? He thought about his bloodline awakening and the terrifying strengthening of his physical body. He thought about how his soul had been tempered in the environment of 9 lifetimes and the terrifying opening of the divine plane. He thought about the more than 300 elixirs in the box on the spaceship. Lu Feng simply wanted to open his mouth and laugh loudly. The gains from all of this were simply too great. There were many empty seats on the spaceship returning to the Cymbidium. However, Lu Feng was sitting in the first-class cabin of the spaceship, which was a cabin with its own small private room. He had his own reasons for making this choice. Now, Lu Feng felt that he didn't need much money for the time being. Therefore, he didn't deliberately try to save money. Lu Feng also chose this place so that no one would disturb him. This was because Lu Feng wanted to use these 5 days to study it properly. After observing his surroundings a little to make sure that there were no surveillance devices or people watching him, Lu Feng took something out of his clothes. It was a crystal. It didn't have a luxurious glow or a resplendent appearance. It was very ordinary. It was just an ordinary crystal. However, it wasn't as ordinary as its appearance. This was because the place where it was placed was one of the 3 most important positions on the ancient Fang clan's altar. How could something like this, which had been carefully placed by the ancient Fang clan and was even more precious than the quasi-divine elixirs, be an ordinary object? Lu Feng believed that it would be of great use. It was just that he didn't know how to use it yet. After pondering for a while, he picked it up and studied it for a long time. However, he still didn't discover anything. In the end, Lu Feng sighed deeply. After thinking for a while, he opened the Sky Network connector in his hand. After activating the scanning device, Lu Feng completely copied the entire crystal into an image and uploaded it to the Heavenly Network to search. Lu Feng still trusted Sky Network quite a bit. He knew that if even the Heavenly Network could not find the source, then there was really nothing he could do. In just a few moments, millions of pieces of information about this type of crystal appeared. Looking at so much information, Lu Feng was dumbfounded for a moment, but after smiling helplessly, he began to read it carefully. No matter what, let's just wait and see. As long as we can discover the true use of this thing, then even the hardships will be worth it. During the next 3 days, besides resting, Lu Feng spent most of his time searching for information on the Heavenly Network. However, the results were not satisfactory. Many of them were introductions to similar crystals, and some were about selling information. None of them could really help Lu Feng. Finally, just as the 3rd day was coming to an end, Lu Feng obtained the information he wanted. Sitting on the recliner, there was a complicated look on his face. Could it really be like this? Actually, if I think about it carefully, it should be like this. After all, the final condensation of a civilization is usually the most outstanding existence of their civilization. Then, this crystal is actually a cultivation technique. In the records about crystals that Lu Feng found, most of them were useless. However, there were a few pieces of information that he did not pay attention to, and he still found them on the third day. The introduction was not very detailed, and it was just a cursory description. However, it was this cursory description that allowed Lu Feng to finally understand what exactly was in his hands. An inheritance crystal. The records of a civilization or a race's civilization, or the condensation of their strongest technology and cultivation techniques. No wonder it was kept there. Thinking about it, the value of this crystal is indeed beyond anything else. It's a pity that this thing doesn't seem to be of much use to me. In the ancient civilization, it was said that there had once been a supreme cultivation technique that surpassed the stars. The definition of a supreme cultivation technique was a supreme technique that could reach the pinnacle. Legend had it that behind every supreme cultivation technique, there was at least a quasi-supreme existence. Only such an existence would be able to condense a sovereign cultivation technique. Of course, it was not to say that every supreme cultivation technique could allow one to reach the level of the Divine King. After all, most supreme cultivation techniques were created by quasi-supreme beings. There were only a few cultivation techniques that were created by the real supreme being of the universe, the peerless Divine King, in the entire universe, and almost every one of them was backed by a powerful race. For example, the human race had given birth to more than a dozen peerless Divine Kings, but there were only 7 records of them who really created cultivation technique. Of the pinnacle supreme cultivation techniques created by these 7 people, only 4 were really passed down. In other words, there were only 4 pinnacle supreme cultivation techniques in the entire human race. Moreover, among these 4, the Federation only controlled 2. However, there were many supreme cultivation techniques created by quasi-supreme beings in the entire human race. A rough estimate showed that there were at least more than 20 of them. Back then, a paragon cultivation technique had appeared on Gufang planet. Lu Feng guessed that the paragon cultivation technique that had appeared had been created by the Gufang civilization's quasi-supreme. But now there was a second one in the final sacrificial ground. Lu Feng could even feel that even if this cultivation technique was not a real pinnacle supreme cultivation technique, it was probably more powerful than the one found by the Federation. After all, it was stored in the sacrificial ground. It's a pity that a supreme cultivation technique is wasted. To me, this thing is not as good as a divine elixir. In terms of body cultivation techniques, Lu Feng had the Great Devil True Body, which could be called an abnormal supreme cultivation technique. Lu Feng knew that the Great Devil True Body was definitely not inferior to any pinnacle supreme cultivation technique. Moreover, this cultivation technique had been extremely suitable for him to cultivate ever since he condensed the original body. Therefore, even if some kind of body cultivation technique were to appear, Lu Feng would not give up on cultivating other cultivation technique. If it was a combat technique cultivation technique, Lu Feng would at most use it as a reference, and it would not be very useful to him. This was because Lu Feng had made a crazy decision in his heart. This decision had followed him through 9 lifetimes, and after his incomparably firm willpower, it had not wavered in the slightest. He, Lu Feng, also wanted to create an invincible cultivation technique. Although it was still early, he had the noblest bloodline in the universe, the Great Devil True Body, and the primordial scripture. He was confident that in the future he would reach the supreme peak. At that time, relying on the cultivation techniques of other experts would not be able to take that final step. Therefore, Lu Feng did not intend to spend countless hours to cultivate a combat technique cultivation technique, even if it was a pinnacle supreme cultivation technique. It was also because of these reasons that Lu Feng did not have the crazy joy of ordinary people when he obtained a possible supreme cultivation technique. Forget it. Obtaining it is a kind of luck. I can't cultivate it, but I can use it as a reference to perfect my soul supremacy. After all, with such a cultivation technique, my soul supremacy's future evolution path will be much smoother. Thinking of this, Lu Feng smiled. He looked at the crystal in his hand for a while, then got up and closed all the doors in the room, and finally returned to his original position. The next moment, Lu Feng's eyes were completely focused on the crystal in front of him. Gradually, his mind power began to burst forth, and all of it gathered toward the crystal. At this moment, all the light in Lu Feng's eyes disappeared. His eyes were dull, as if he was in a daze. This state lasted for a very long time. When Lu Feng recovered, it was already more than 10 hours later. The moment he woke up, Lu Feng's eyes were filled with an indescribable ecstasy. It was an indescribable color that could not be concealed. It's actually this. How could there be such a thing? Didn't the legends say that with the end of that era, all the complete chapters had completely disappeared and were completely annihilated? But why is there such a complete existence here? Lu Feng forced himself to calm down, but it was futile. At this moment, his heart was beating too fast, to the point where it could not be suppressed. The next moment, Lu Feng stood up and paced back and forth for a long time before he finally calmed himself down. But even so, Lu Feng was still very excited. No wonder it was placed there. Before this, I was still wondering where the ancient Fang civilization got their hands on a sovereign-level cultivation method. Now it seems that they only have that one. This thing is really too precious. It's almost equivalent to the condensation of an era's civilization. It's an era. Even compared to the peak supremacy cultivation technique, it's much more precious. In his mind, the information he got from the crystal was still rolling around. And those things still made Lu Feng very excited. From the crystal, Lu Feng had indeed obtained a cultivation method. However, this cultivation method was not a cultivation method. To be precise, this was a kind of auxiliary cultivation technique, and it could not even be considered a cultivation technique. Its name was pill scripture. As the name implied, this cultivation technique had only one use, and that was to refine pills. In today's civilization, almost all of the medicinal pills that humans had were found in ancient ruins. Of course, just the pills in the ruins could not satisfy the needs of humans. And this was what led to the emergence of potions. The emergence of potions naturally caused the status of psychics to skyrocket. In terms of nobility, no one in the entire Federation could compare. Chapter 72. The reason psychic masters were able to achieve such a status was because some of them had mastered some of the ancient alchemy technique. They could achieve a perfect coordination in the medicine they concocted, which was something that technology couldn't achieve. This made the effects of the medicine even more heaven-defying. Of course, psychic masters who could achieve this were extremely rare. However, this wasn't the most precious thing. According to the legends, there were some extremely terrifying god masters and sage masters who could actually refine elixirs. The elixirs they refined might not be as good as the ones produced in ancient times. However, they were already real elixirs. What these people relied on was not only their frightening talent, but even more so, their alchemy skills. Unfortunately, the alchemy techniques obtained by the Federation were all incomplete. Even if they were more complete, they only recorded some low-level cultivation technique. Therefore, the elixirs that were truly at the legendary level and above in the Federation were basically produced in ancient ruins. However, things were different now. Although he didn't completely understand it, Lu Feng understood how terrifying the technique in his hands was. During these 10 hours of inheritance, Lu Feng had already browsed through the entire contents of the Pill Sutra, except for a few forbidden chapters. Based on what he knew, Lu Feng believed that this would be the most complete alchemy technique in history. It was even possible that this would be the most complete and precious alchemy chapter of the era of alchemy. No matter what, the value of this thing is really too great. As long as I can comprehend the technique in it, then my future. Lu Feng's eyes shone with boundless light. Indeed, this thing was too precious. He was afraid that even divine elixirs couldn't compare to it. Of course, he wasn't completely stunned by this sudden surprise. After all, Lu Feng also understood that whether or not he could comprehend the Pill Sutra was still uncertain. It seems like I have to speed up my cultivation. According to the Pill Sutra, I have to wait until my mind power has solidified before I can practice alchemy. In that case, I have to cultivate to the level of a great psychic master as soon as possible. For the first time, Lu Feng was looking forward to the cultivation of a psychic master. He knew that as long as he could truly comprehend the contents of the Pill Scripture, then his future would be incomparably terrifying. At that time, his status alone would be countless times more honorable than anyone else's. Standing in the private room, Lu Feng looked at the boundless galaxy outside the ship. His heart was gradually beating faster and faster. On the 5th day, the spaceship finally returned to the Cymbidium. The place where they landed was the city that Lu Feng had left. After getting off the ship, Lu Feng didn't stop. He ran straight to the parking lot, found his hover car, and flew back home. This time, Lu Feng was really anxious. Other than wanting to know more about his current situation, the biggest reason was the school. Lu Feng did a quick calculation. It had been more than 100 days since the Federal University opened. In that case, more than half of the first semester of his first year of university life had already passed. Therefore, Lu Feng was thinking more about hurrying to the Federal University in the central city to register. Soon, Lu Feng returned home. Looking at the exact same place as when he left, Lu Feng knew that his parents hadn't come back. After hesitating for a while, Lu Feng finally dragged his suitcase back to his room. Putting down his suitcase, Lu Feng took out a measuring instrument from his closet and immediately began the test. With a ding sound, Lu Feng looked at the instrument's display. On it, a number was clearly written, 42. 17 foot. 42. 17 stars. As expected, Lu Feng let out a deep breath. It was just as he thought. He had really become an intermediate warrior, and an intermediate one at that. 42, 17. As long as his strength increased by 18 stars, he would be able to take a step forward and become an advanced intermediate warrior. Of course, all of this was within Lu Feng's expectations. He was testing it now just to verify the specifics. Now, what Lu Feng really wanted to test was the increase in his physical strength. Taking a deep breath, Lu Feng suddenly struck a peerless blow at the place where there were countless fist marks. At this moment, the whole air produced a sticky feeling, causing a chaotic scene to appear in the room. Lu Feng didn't use any martial arts, only his physical strength, but he was able to create such a scene, which was really shocking. In an instant, Lu Feng looked at the display, and a number appeared on it, which made Lu Feng take a breath of cold air, his eyes flashing with a look of surprise and shock. 261. It's actually 261 stars. It's more than 6 times my physical strength. So, after the bloodline awakening, the extent of my physical strength has actually increased by 2 times? 2 times the increase may not be too shocking, but 2 times the physical strength increase is really a bit shocking. After all, the physical strength increase is a basic increase. If it was a battle between 2 peerless geniuses, they were all of the same strength, and the comprehension of martial arts was the same, the limit being 10 times. However, one side's physical strength was 2 times more than the other's. Then, the difference between their actual combat strength increase was 20 times. With a difference of 20 times, multiplied by the terrifying base, the power that could be unleashed was absolutely shocking. I didn't expect my physical strength to have such a terrifying increase. Sure enough, the existence of the descendants of God makes those geniuses much better than ordinary people at the beginning. But it's a pity that I've only just awakened my bloodline, and most of the power is still integrated in my body. I can only wait for the future to further explore the treasures in my body. Lu Feng knew that those geniuses of God's bloodline might not be as terrifying as his at the beginning of their awakening. After all, before he awakened his bloodline, he had condensed the primitive body in his mind space. It was also because of the existence of the primitive body that his physical strength had increased by 6 times when he had just awakened his bloodline. Previously, when I saw Child Luo's physical strength increase, it was definitely more than 7 times. He has already reached the pinnacle of the realm of warriors, and he's only one step away from completely transforming and becoming a deity. At that time, it will be the moment when the bloodline of his physical body is completely awakened. According to this estimation, once his bloodline is awakened, it will provide him with at least an 8 times increase in physical strength. What a terrifying bloodline! I just don't know that his bloodline is inherited from the peerless divine king of the universe. Previously, when Child Luo performed the supreme technique, the power that erupted was too shocking. In order to bear such a huge power, his physical body must be extremely terrifying. At least, Lu Feng vaguely felt that Child Luo's physical strength at that time was stronger than his current physical strength. He should have reached the limit of 7 times. According to ancient legends, the physical strength limit was a 10-fold increase. No matter what bloodline one had, no matter what divine object or holy object one used, the physical strength limit was a 10-fold increase. Of course, there were also existences who broke this shackle and allowed their physical strength to reach a shocking 11 times increase. However, those who could do this were undoubtedly the most powerful existences in the entire universe. They had another name, and that was the peerless divine king of the universe. An 11 times increase in physical strength was an absolute forbidden zone that only the divine king could enter. Therefore, 11 times was also called the forbidden zone of the supreme. He put away all the instruments. Lu Feng looked at the suitcase in front of him, and his heart was burning with passion. He knew that his hope of being able to quickly break through all depended on these elixirs. With the existence of the Primordial Sutra, as long as I comprehend enough, I can definitely improve quickly. When I become a spiritual master, I can try to see if I can become a real alchemist. He opened the suitcase and took out 40 elixirs. Lu Feng carefully put the remaining elixirs away. Lu Feng knew that he didn't need so many elixirs at the moment. Therefore, he would use them the next time he came back. After packing everything, Lu Feng looked at the time and realized that half a day had passed since he arrived home. He opened the Sky Network and looked at the location of the central city of the Cymbidium. Lu Feng calculated a little and finally nodded gently. There's no one at home anyway, and it's been a long time since school started. I don't want to waste any more time. During the time on the spaceship, Lu Feng didn't feel very tired, so he didn't intend to rest. After preparing hastily, Lu Feng directly walked out of the door. After locking onto the villa again, he drove his hover car toward the central city. Originally, Lu Feng didn't intend to be so ostentatious. After all, his standard of living had improved. However, as a first-year university student, it was still very rare for him to drive a sports car worth more than 600,000 yuan. However, Lu Feng still drove it. The main reason was that Lu Feng was afraid of trouble. If he took the special intercity express, Not only did he have to buy a ticket and wait, but he also had to feel crowded. The time taken to get there would far exceed the time it took to drive there. This was also something that Lu Feng didn't want to come into contact with. Therefore, he directly drove his sports car and left. The central city was called Honglan City. Honglan City wasn't close to the city that Lu Feng lived in, but it wasn't far either. Lu Feng raised the speed to 800 yuan and spent nearly 5 hours before he finally arrived. When he saw the city, Lu Feng slowed down. Following the guidance on the Sky Network, Lu Feng easily found the location of the Federal University. In fact, even without the Sky Network, Lu Feng believed that he could still find the Federal University. Because in this city, as long as he flew to the sky, he could easily find the location of the Federal University. Chapter 73. In Honglan City there were 4 tallest buildings. They were the Psychic Hall, the Warrior Hall, the Government Office Building, and the main teaching building of the Federal University. Therefore, even without the instructions on the Heavenly Network, Lu Feng believed that he could find it quickly. After another 20 minutes, Lu Feng finally arrived at the entrance of the Federal University. Looking at the towering door, Lu Feng's eyes revealed a trace of a strange emotion. He had to admit that the main entrance of the Federal University was too shocking. Lu Feng had seen many buildings since he was young. But among the buildings that existed in reality, the entrance of the Federal University was definitely one of the most majestic. Just the height of the door was over 30 meters, and the width was a shocking 100 meters. With such a huge door, there would be no problem for thousands of people to enter and exit at the same time. Lu Feng took a deep breath. He knew that in the future, he would have to spend a long time studying here. Lu Feng reignited the engine and was about to drive into the university. Wait, I'm talking about you, the person who drives the sports car. Just as he started walking, he was stopped by a voice that called out to him before he could even walk 10 meters. Looking at the guards walking in front of him, Lu Feng revealed a confused expression. Lu Feng opened the car door and walked out. When he saw the guards had already walked to his side, Lu Feng revealed a smile. "Gentlemen, what's the matter?" Being stopped for no reason, Lu Feng was also very confused. But he also knew that this was the Federal University, and these people were the guards of the Federal University. It was better not to offend these people. Outsiders are not allowed to drive in the university. If you want to visit, then please park your car on the side. There are special sightseeing cars in the university. Hearing this, Lu Feng's smile revealed a hint of understanding. It seemed that these people treated him as an outsider. "Gentlemen, I'm a student of the Federal University, I'm not an outsider." The few of them sized up Lu Feng, scanned him, and took out a device to scan Lu Feng's car. After everything was done, they looked at each other. But their expressions were not as good as before. "You're from the university, why isn't your car registered?" The cars of the students and teachers in the school were all recorded. "Also, you don't seem to exist in the university's records." Lu Feng was a bit embarrassed. He had no choice but to bite the bullet and speak again. "Actually, I'm a new student." Before Lu Feng finished speaking, a person who looked like a captain waved his hand. "New student? New students start in September, and it's almost December. Who are you trying to fool? Don't tell me you're new here." At this moment, Dean Wan's face finally bloomed with a slightly bright smile. "It's been nearly 3 months since the start of the semester, and you're only reporting now. I thought you wouldn't come." In fact, Dean Wan's worries were not unnecessary. Naturally, he had heard the reports of Lu Feng's performance from the teachers below. In the Federation, although their Federation Academy was the most famous, it was not the only one. In addition to them, The Government Academy and the Capital Academy were institutions of higher learning that were not inferior to them in the slightest. If it were not for the existence of the rules of their respective schools, their reputation in the Federation would not be inferior to the Federal University in the slightest. An outstanding genius like Lu Feng would probably be coveted even by those two universities. Therefore, a month after the start of the semester, Lu Feng still had not reported. They thought that Lu Feng had been poached by one of those two universities. Dean Wan was disappointed for a while. Now that he saw Lu Feng actually appear, how could he not be surprised? Therefore, he did not have any scruples and directly ran over to confirm Lu Feng's identity. Comparing Lu Feng's appearance to his impression, Dean Wan was finally completely certain. It's fine if you're late. After all, who doesn't have problems? Lu Feng, come in with me. I'll accompany you to apply for the relevant school documents in a while. After saying this, he pulled Lu Feng inside. Lu Feng originally wanted to drive himself, but when he saw Dean Wan's expression, he was too embarrassed to say anything. He could only leave the car at the entrance and follow Dean Wan into the campus and get into his hover car. Looking at Lu Feng's departing figure, the surrounding guards surrounded him. They looked at each other in dismay before finally looking at the captain. Seeing this scene, the captain only shook his head. I only know that he's a specially recruited psychic. But even if he's a specially recruited psychic, he shouldn't be able to trouble the new dean. After all, he's a warrior who came with the new principal. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.